Chapter 4, Number 10, Rose Road. Harry sat on the edge of his narrow bed, staring at the pale morning light seeping through the curtains. He hadn't answered the owl that delivered Sirius's letter last night, nor had he replied to the dozen unanswered texts from Ron and Hermione. He was waiting. A firm rap came at the front door of Number 4, Privet Drive. Sirius Black, true to form, had arrived early. But Harry still said nothing. He had made a startling decision. This time, he would let his mother speak for him. It wasn't mere fancy. Harry's mind still echoed with the strange meeting he'd had after the year-end feast. In his dream, if it could even be called that, he'd found himself in a space so pure and white it felt like an empty set waiting for a director's cue. There, Ryan had appeared. Their reunion was brief, stripped of the grand adventures they'd shared in the past, more like a quick scene filmed for an unseen audience. Harry suspected Ryan staged it all to turn their exploits into entertainment, yet he also knew Ryan had gone further for him than most would ever bother. In barely 10 minutes of dream time, Ryan had spoken only a handful of cryptic lines, enough to jolt Harry awake. Even more surreal, when he opened his eyes, it was dawn. No more than minutes had passed in reality. Harry shook his head, as if to clear away the fog of half-remembered images. He pulled on a simple jumper and collected the things he needed for the day: textbooks, his wand, and an unexpectedly sturdy travel bag emblazoned with a subtle silver serpent, a gift from Lucius Malfoy. As he packed, he replayed Ryan's final words. With Penelope and Kate moving into 7th year next term, Ryan wouldn't have time for development games any longer. Instead, he'd promised to install something, though Harry wasn't sure what install entailed. Whatever it was, Ryan warned, Harry shouldn't be surprised when the changes came. The knock came again, harder this time, impatient. Harry took a steadying breath, zipped up the bag, and rose to his feet. He smoothed back his hair, squared his shoulders, and crossed the hall. "Coming," he called, voice calm. As he opened the door, Sirius's familiar grin split across his face. Tomorrow, Harry knew, he'd start asking the questions he'd been too stunned to speak. But for now, he let his mother's quiet strength guide him into whatever lay ahead. The moment Harry grasped the full weight of Aunt Petunia's harsh words, a translucent interface, visible only to him, flickered across his vision. It looked exactly like the quest log from the role-playing games Dudley used to obsess over. A linear array of exclamation points marking one task after another, each a stepping stone in some author's grand design. He blinked and scanned the list. There were the usual mundane errands, and then, at the very bottom, a final entry that made his heart hammer. Resurrect Lily Evans. He tapped it. A window sprang open, explaining in precise detail that his next job was to locate the resurrection stone. He tapped again, and a flood of text scrolled into view. The stone's whispered history, its powers, its terrible limits. To bring his mother back from the other side, it said, he would also need a guiding light, something strong enough to beckon her spirit across the gulf of death. That light was the magic of love she had planted inside him. Harry's breath caught. If the love in his heart could pull Lily back to the living, there was no hint of a similar spark for James. His father would have to remain lost. "Harry, are you ready?" Sirius's voice drifted up the stairs, yanking Harry out of his thoughts. "Lupin and Tonks are waiting downstairs," he added. Harry squared his shoulders. There was no turning back now. Harry hefted his bag with resolve. His first task, etched in his mind, was to stand before the enchanted mirror at midnight, shatter it, then restore it, night after night. He still didn't understand what purpose lay behind such a bewildering assignment, but he suspected it had to do with resurrection magi, sea power that skirted the divine, a realm ordinary wizards, and perhaps even Dumbledore, could not safely tread. Increasingly certain that this ritual was linked to the recent oddities surrounding the Mirror of Erised, Harry let a thought crystallize. In all the history of magic, no witch or wizard had ever truly brought someone back from the dead. Rumors whispered that Voldemort's dark arts had come closer than anyone dared admit. If so, perhaps dismantling the Dark Lord's enchantments around the Resurrection Stone was only the first, simplest step. He drew a deep breath and turned for one last look at Number 4 Privet Drive, baking under the blistering sun. Next time he came back here, he vowed, he wouldn't have to face it alone. Slung over his shoulder, his backpack felt a little lighter. Cradling Hedwig's cage in one arm, he strode off toward a waiting figure. Sirius sat behind the wheel of his roofless, emerald-green motor car, grinning and waving energetically. Harry couldn't help but smile in return as he climbed in, ready for whatever came next. Harry didn't recognize the car Sirius had pulled up in, but judging by Uncle Vernon's agape expression when he opened the door, it had to be extremely expensive. Harry nearly convinced himself that Vernon must be a squib, an unaware one at that, who had just stumbled into Metamorphmagus abilities. Otherwise, how could his face change so completely in an instant? Sirius let one hand rest casually on the steering wheel as he glanced over at Harry. Wondering why I came to pick you up in style? Even Mrs. Winter from number 11 Privet Drive, famously picky about men's looks, couldn't help but give Sirius an appreciative wink as he rolled past. Harry cleared his throat and nodded, playing along. Yeah, it's an Aston Martin, Sirius said with a satisfied grin. A proper sports car. The Dursleys nearly choked when they saw it. My consulting fee wasn't wasted. This beauty made Vernon drop his jaw. You remember how they thought you were just some poor country boy when you visited with Lily? Bet they're thinking twice now. James, you're far too cocky, Sirius teased. Why not consult a muggle expert like me and toss a few galleons at a sports car? He trailed off into his own memories as the car accelerated. Even in this sweltering weather, the rush of wind against Harry's face stole every last bit of heat from his skin. Each time they neared a trash bin or the tail end of another vehicle, the enchanted car swerved at the last second, the obstacle leaping aside as if by its own magic. Before Harry knew it, they were on an unfamiliar street. Leaning out the window, he squinted at a passing sign. Rosaceae Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Rosaceae Drive? Harry murmured. That's nowhere near Privet Drive. He knew Privet Hedges had inspired the older neighborhood's street names. Roses, with their botanical family name, Rosaceae, marked a later, more remote development. As Harry wondered why they detoured so far from home, the car's speed dropped, its engine easing into a soft purr. Sorry, I got distracted, Sirius muttered, running a hand through his hair as he guided the enchanted car toward a fork at the end of the street. No sooner had they passed through than a white mist swirled around them, and from its depths a massive iron gate materialized. It groaned open so sharply, Harry felt it in his teeth. Welcome to my new place. 10 Rose Road, Little Whinging, Surrey. Sirius brought the car to a halt beside a smoothly polished marble path that wound through a riot of flower beds. In the center of one bed stood a fountain carved with intricate magical creatures. Its spray caught the light in prismatic arcs, painting rainbows in the mist. Jewel-hued butterflies, their wings shimmering like polished jasper, danced among the blossoms. Harry blinked. Your place? Before him loomed a mansion as vast as 2 football fields, its walls and towers gleaming in the afternoon sun. Every courtyard and terrace was edged in marble and alive with enchantments no Muggle architect could replicate. Ivy climbed its facades in living patterns, and magical lanterns floated under the eaves. It was, quite simply, extraordinary. Sirius popped the trunk. Home sweet home. The building before me looked carved from a single colossal crystal, no seams of brick or mortar, as if molded from one flawless gem. In the bright summer sun, its walls glowed with a soft, enchanting light. What kind of place was this? Special thanks to my classmates, Jiao Shitgun and Taishi Yumisilk, for their monthly tickets, and to everyone else for your recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 448. Harry was stunned. Ryan felt a pang of regret as he watched the final credits of his favorite show, Harry Potter in Another World, starring Kate and Penelope. The series had been suspended. There simply wasn't any more source material to adapt. Still, Ryan was determined not to break his promise. A new production, Harry Potter and the Resurrection Stone, was on the horizon. A year later, he still missed his binge-watching marathons, but those hours had been repurposed. With Kate and Penelope set to graduate next year, the girls convinced their families they needed a summer trip together, so they spent the entire season living at Smith Castle. As a side effect, Nagini never got a chance to assume human form. Instead, she remained in pet form alongside Jerry and Dr. Flywheel. From time to time, Ryan would stroll with Fleur, who could barely contain her excitement at the prospect of attending Hogwarts. And Luna? She'd shadow him nearly every minute of the day. Her father, Xenophilius Lovegood, was both puzzled and amused by his daughter's newfound obsession with catching the iridescent bubblefish in the castle ponds, though he had no idea why Luna was so determined to collect them. Ryan, ever the master of time management and multitasking, felt unusually drained. Hermione's family, notoriously stringent, had announced a summer trip to France. In the original timeline, Hermione's pale skin had been scorched to a deep tan by the merciless French sun. Now Ryan hesitated to remind her about sunburn. On top of that, his friend Furong's family lived in Paris. What if the two families ran into each other and ended up gossiping about their respective crushes? A sudden cough jerked Ryan back to the present. He was alone in the bathroom, an exceedingly rare moment of privacy, and let his mind wander. Before him, as if projected onto the wall, appeared a sprawling, moonlit mansion. Standing at the gates were Britain's most celebrated Hogwarts alumnus, Harry Potter, and beside him, Sirius Black, the so-called Diamond King of the wizarding world, recently freed after years of wrongful imprisonment. Sirius eyed Harry with a playful grin. "What, were you expecting something more ordinary?" Harry shook his head and waved at the scene. "These are bargains." Sirius swept his arm over the neatly trimmed lawns and glittering fountains. "The true treasures here aren't the jewels or rare artifacts," he explained. "They're the enchanted leaf butterflies flitting through the oaks. And just beyond this wall," he tapped the wrought iron gate, "is the confusion charm that cloaks the entire manor. To muggles, it's as if nothing exists. Wizards see only a gentle mist hovering over the grounds." As the vision faded, Ryan straightened up. No matter how many threads his mind juggled, magic always had a way of surprising him and reminding him that even the best-laid plans sometimes needed a dash of wonder. The fountain's beauty, pure magic. And this sprawling mansion, it isn't carved from rare marble or hand-hewn oak. It's nothing more than ordinary cobblestones, bits of iron and timber, all fused together with a potent binding potion. Sirius turned to Harry, a teasing smile lighting his face. "Unbelievable, isn't it?" Harry could only shake his head. He still couldn't wrap his mind around it. When had the wizarding world advanced so quickly? In their world, research and development teams famously churn out new enchanted products every year, self-cleaning cauldrons, self-flying broomsticks, even animated theater props that tell jokes on demand. But buildings? Wizards normally erect their homes in seconds with a single incantation. They never bothered with architects, engineers, or planning committees. Need a manor perched on a cliff? A few practical spells, and it materializes. Want a snug cottage in the woods? One charm summons the walls. Another sets the roof. Geology, layout, even sunlight exposure be damned. Wealthy families simply inherit an ancestral and punch in enchantments wherever they please. And if you're truly extravagant, you'll imbue every brick, every shingle, with its own magic, so no structure ever settles, shifts, or crumbles. It all stands there, perfect and timeless, supported by limitless sorcery rather than nails or mortar. Harry stared up at the mansion's turrets, still incredulous. Somewhere between yesterday's broomstick prototypes and today's ever-changing enchanted gadgets, the magical world's builders had quietly revolutionized construction, one spell at a time. In the British wizarding world, no construction firm enjoyed greater renown than the Nimbus Racing Broomstick Company, until now. Vought Construction has emerged as a true game-changer, not for crafting broomsticks, but for pioneering composite materials designed expressly for building grand wizarding manors. "You have to understand," Sirius began, "that once the Ministry of Magic threw open the doors to magically adapting Muggle inventions, our community's development took off like a rocket. Wizards have since delved into every corner of Muggle science, hunting for innovations that, when fused with magic, spark a revolutionary reaction." He paused, letting the point settle. Vought Construction exemplifies this trend. Stephen Vought borrowed the Muggle concept of composite materials, which alchemy had only hinted at but never fully realized, and threw himself into deciphering countless complex material formulas. With a hefty investment of gold galleons and the support of Skywalker Alchemy Workshop, he founded his own company, and the results speak for themselves. Sirius leaned back with a thoughtful sigh. Even after his own wrongful conviction was overturned, he remained one of the wizarding world's most forward-thinking rebels. And even he had to admit, Vought's vision was nothing short of revolutionary. Chapter 7. A New Construction in Diagon Alley. Sirius leaned back in his chair, swirling the last drops of butterbeer in his mug. Even he had to admit that, with all the innovations swirling through the wizarding world these days, he was starting to feel a little behind the times. "Did you know Stephen Walter just took a job at Skywalker's alchemy workshop?" he said, looking across the table at Harry. Harry's eyes lit up. Skywalker? As in Luke Skywalker? Ever since a special Doraemon episode had featured a visit to that very workshop, packed with gadgets that blurred the line between magic and machinery, Harry had been obsessed. He'd pestered Professor Doraemon with questions about every contraption in the place, and then stayed up all night researching alchemical composites. Sirius grinned. "That's the one. But here's the interesting bit. The owner of Skywalker's isn't nearly as short-sighted as the people at Nimbus Racing Brooms." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Nimbus? You mean the company that spun off from Cosmic Broom Co.? The same lot whose founder tried to pitch a new racing broom idea to his old bosses and got laughed out of their boardroom?" "Exactly," Sirius said. Rather than scoffing at new ideas, Skywalker's workshop actually invested in one of Walter's early prototypes, a revolutionary composite blend he'd been perfecting. They used it to renovate their Diagon Alley storefront from top to bottom. Harry whistled. "So that's why the place looks so otherworldly." "Precisely." Sirius closed his eyes, recalling the grand opening. It was like walking into a cloudscape. The facade seemed to float, a smooth, silvery material that rippled in the sunlight. And right above the door, the words Skywalker's Alchemy Workshop were spelled out in flowing metal that gleamed like starlight. Harry leaned forward. "That must have cost a fortune. How much did they end up spending?" Sirius chuckled. "I'll tell you about the bill, and why I ended up hiring the water construction company over another round of drinks. Let's just say even the goblins at Gringotts raised an impressed eyebrow." Harry smiled. Whatever the price, he was more determined than ever to see that workshop's secrets up close. After all, if Doraemon and Luke Skywalker agreed on one thing, it was as that the future of magic might just rest on a little ingenious engineering and a spark of imagination. "Just gold galleons, round numbers," Sirius said absently, still lost in his memories. He barely registered Harry's protest. Harry stared at him in disbelief. "That's called small change?" he blurted. 100,000 galleons is small change? For comparison, a Hogwarts professor today earns 100 galleons a week. Even if they spent absolutely nothing, never bought a new robe or a textbook, it would take them almost 10 years to save up that much. You seriously call that pocket money? Sirius waved a hand dismissively. "It's always been there, Harry. The estate practically runs itself. I've gone through the manual. Maintaining a place like this is simpler than you'd think." "But you said it was for me?" Harry cut in, eyes wide. "You want to give me this house?" Sirius's grin was warm. "Exactly. I know how badly you want to leave the Dursleys, and well," he hesitated, then added, "you're engaged now. I thought it only fitting that you and Ginny have a home of your own once you're older, right here, at the old Black family manor." Harry's breath caught. The weight of Sirius's gift, the promise of a future beyond Privet Drive, settled over him like a warm cloak, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly free. Harry stared, incredulous. "I wrote that letter the night after the Quidditch match, June 6th, and today is only the 18th. You built an entire manor for me in just 12 days. Chapter 6. Enthusiastic Tonks. "Do you really think 12 days will be enough?" Sirius raised an eyebrow. 12 days? You've got to be joking. Remember how Molly and the others built the burrow in an afternoon? He shook his head, as if shamefaced by the ease with which witches and wizards accomplished chores. "Why do you think the Blacks stuck to hoarding land instead of going into business? With a little planning, or a well-placed confundus charm, you can take over any Muggle's villa, and they'll never remember it belongs to them." Harry sighed. All right, magic wasn't infallibly convenient, but it still beat hauling bricks and mortar by hand. He glanced at Ryan, who'd whisked them from the moon's surface back to Hogwarts in the blink of an eye, a feat that left even Harry's breath caught in wonder. He nudged Sirius. Come on, I've already told you. Remus and Tonks are expecting me at home. Sirius stayed rooted to the spot, one corner of his mouth quirking in that same cynical half-smile Harry had seen on his mother's old photographs. This isn't home, Harry. It's just a safe house. You're really leaving me here alone? Harry squared his shoulders. Ginny won't be around, nor will Mr. Weasley. You and Tonks will have the place to yourselves. Sirius finally moved, slinging a battered pack over his shoulder. Fine, but one wrong turn in those dark corridors, and I'm hexing you so hard your own shadow won't recognize you. Harry grinned, wand already in hand. Protego, then. I'll see you in a week and a half. As Harry melted through the doorway toward the courtyard, Sirius paused, glanced back with that familiar glint in his dark eyes, and whispered, "Try not to break anything major." Then he followed, disappearing into the winding hallways of 12 Grimmauld Place. Wait a minute. Weasley wants me here all alone with her until we're engaged? Harry's mind raced at the suggestion. It was an intriguing thought, yet before he could indulge it, Sirius cut in. Not quite, Harry, Sirius said, making a little flourish with his hand. He drew Harry's gaze to the inner pocket of his impeccably tailored suit. Even Uncle Vernon couldn't have found fault with it. From that pocket, Sirius withdrew something small and pink, just large enough to slip between his fingers. It looked like a miniature version of a Muggle anti-theft door alarm, only far cuter. Harry stared, certain he'd seen it before, but the answer teased the edge of his memory without falling clear. Sirius's grin widened. Placing the odd device on the gleaming marble pavement, he tapped it with his wand. Click, click. Instantly, the tiny gadget emitted a muffled, gurgling noise, as if porridge were bubbling furiously under a lid. Before Harry could lean in for a closer look, a solid iron portal, 2 meters high, shimmered into existence, its pale pink surface gleaming in the afternoon light. Sirius stepped back, arms spread wide in triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I give you the Weasleys' new security door." He winked at Harry. "Perfect for keeping unwanted guests out and ensuring very engaged conversations stay private." Harry stared in astonishment as the little white door before him began to swell. "It's growing," he whispered. Sirius Black beamed. "Surprised? It's the Anywhere door, portable edition." Harry's cheeks burned with excitement. "No way, and it still works just like the original?" "With full magical potency," Sirius confirmed. "It can expand or shrink at will without losing a single enchantment." Harry's mind raced. "If we master this, I could finally do it. Shrink number 12, Grimmauld Place, and tour the world with Dad and his friends." Sirius's gaze softened, and for a moment tears glimmered in his eyes. "That was exactly my plan." "It's straight out of Doraemon," Harry exclaimed, then glanced over his shoulder at the elegant mansion not far off. "So this is really going to be our home. What about Grimmauld Place?" Sirius stepped toward the sleek building. "I custom-tailored this house for you two. Its layout isn't just a temporary hideout. It'll also host your engagement party with Ginny on the 21st. Harry stood slack-jawed. "Your place is enormous. I thought only the Weasleys and my close friends would be there." Sirius gave him a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. I know you don't enjoy crowds, so I've kept the guest list small." Harry's heart pounded. A portable Anywhere door, a brand new home, and an upcoming celebration. Suddenly, everything felt possible. "Besides Molly and the others, you and Ginny get to choose the rest of the candidates. Except that you don't want to leave the Dursleys. You've guessed everything else right." Harry's heart sank at Sirius's expression. His godfather was trying so hard to please him, almost flattering him. "Sirius, you've done more than enough," Harry said, pursing his lips. "No," Sirius insisted, voice tight. "It's not enough. Even after everything, you're still willing to stay with a family like the Dursleys." "That just shows I haven't done nearly enough for you," Harry countered quietly. Sirius glanced awkwardly at the marble fountain beside them, as if he wished to disappear into its spray. "It's not the same thing," Harry added gently. "You've been more than good. You've been extraordinary. So much so that, for the first time, I feel like I have a father." Sirius stiffened. "You know, I barely remember my own father," Harry continued, stepping forward to stand at the fountain's edge. "I never felt an ounce of fatherly love at the Dursleys, but you've given me that. You've given me more than I ever thought possible." Harry met Sirius's gaze. "Come on. We should get going. Sirius wiped at the wet corners of his eyes, his ears coloring pink. He couldn't hold Harry's stare and shifted his gaze to the pale pink door where they'd been tacking up playbills for tonight's performance. Begrudgingly, he nodded. Together, they turned and hurried off, side by side. Sirius slipped his wand into what looked like a keyhole in the stone wall. He closed his eyes and murmured an incantation under his breath. After a tense moment, there was a sharp click. Gently he pressed, and a shimmering doorway opened before them, revealing a long, dimly lit corridor lined with ancestors' portraits. Up ahead, Remus Lupin stood arm in arm with a young witch whose hair was a rich chestnut brown. Harry recognized her at once. "She's my cousin, Nymphadora Tonks," Sirius announced, removing his wand from the portal. The archway winked shut behind him with another click as its magic ebbed away. He slipped the now inert keyhole device into his pocket. Tonks stiffened. "Sirius, don't call me Nymphadora," she snapped. "Call me Tonks." Sirius shrugged, a teasing smirk on his face. "Well, Nymphadora Tonks it is then, if your mother hadn't given you that ridiculous name." Before he could finish, Tonks's hair flashed bright bubblegum pink and stood on end. She drew herself up, eyes blazing, and it was clear Harry wasn't the only one who thought she looked ready to hex Sirius into next week. But before she could raise her wand, Lupin's hand closed firmly around her arm. The tension in her shoulders melted away as he guided her palm downward. Within seconds, her hair softened back to its warm brown hue, and her angry flush drained from her cheeks. "I'm sorry," Tonks murmured, almost to herself, her voice now gentle as water. But Harry knew, with Lupin's calming grip, she seemed like a different person altogether. More tender, less fierce. And for a moment, Harry caught a glimpse of both sides of Nymphadora Tonks, the defiant witch and the gentle friend. Together, they stepped into the corridor, the ancestral portraits silently watching as the unlikely company moved deeper into the Black family home. Tonks closed her eyes, her brow furrowing as if she were straining to remember something. A moment later, her hair shifted back to its usual brown, matching Lupin's. "Oh," she exclaimed, "I nearly forgot about you." She bounded over to Harry, wrapped him in a tight hug, and whispered, in his ear, "I can't thank you enough, for me and for Remus." Stepping back, she studied Harry's surprised face. "Aren't you taken aback? I'm a metamorphmagus. I can change my appearance at will. It's a birth gift. During Auror training, I scored highest in concealment and disguise without even studying. I think Mad Eye recruited me into the Order of the Phoenix for exactly that talent." At that moment, Remus Lupin approached. "Hello, Harry," he said quietly. "Haven't seen you in days." Tonks slipped her hand into his, the earlier pride in her voice replaced by something gentler and warm. Chapter 7. Pluto Dragon in the Mirror. Time had a way of rushing by, and in the blink of an eye, the next morning had arrived. Yet the memory of last night's mission in the Mirror Realm still clung to Harry like a stubborn nightmare. He had failed, and no amount of familiar surroundings could chase that failure away. Back at Sirius Black's house, even Tonks's lively chatter couldn't lift his spirits. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, when the door burst open and Ron charged in, wand at the ready. "Niffler!" Ron shouted. A sleek, mischievous creature with a pouch full of shiny trinkets appeared in a flash. "Erumpent!" A massive, rhinoceros-like beast rumbled into view. "Ashwinder!" A slender, glowing serpent coiled itself on the floor. Harry sat up, pulling the quilt down to reveal his tangled hair. "What on earth are you doing?" he groaned. Ron's face split into a grin. "Haven't you heard about the new show? It just came out, Doraemon's Summoner Kingdom." "Doraemon?" Harry echoed, bewildered. "Yeah, it's set in a parallel magical world. Nobita is basically Luke Skywalker, and Doraemon is his trusty droid. They join forces with Mara Jade, Shizuka in this version, to explore the inner world. Even Darth Vader shows up as Fat Tiger, backed by his henchman, Count Dooku Cantor, or Xiao Fu." The Niffler, Erumpent, and Ashwinder vanished in puffs of smoke. Ron waved his wand again. "In that realm, wizards don't duel the way we do. They rely on summoning spells, channeling their own magic to call forth contracted creatures for battle. Imagine summoning a dragon or a phoenix to fight at your side." Harry frowned. "You're telling me they conjure actual living beasts?" "Exactly," Ron said. "It's like combining a binding contract with a summoning charm. Their entire output of magical power fuels the creature they call. Think of the strategic depth. You forge a personal bond with your summon and fight alongside it. Harry rubbed his temples. Sounds exhausting. But think of the possibilities. Ron waved his wand once more, and a tiny pygmy puff materialized, bouncing cheerfully on the carpet. After last night, I could use a distraction, and maybe we could learn something, new tactics to use against you-know-who. Harry hesitated, then smiled faintly. All right, Ron, show me what this Summoner Kingdom is all about. It described dozens of fascinating magical creatures, some still roaming our world, others extinct for centuries, like the dreaded Plutosaurus. So popular was this book that even students who hadn't enrolled in the Magical Creatures course petitioned their deans, desperate to switch into it. Ron nudged Harry, grinning. You're not exactly jumping at the chance to change classes, are you? He didn't notice how the name Plutosaurus had quietly snagged Harry's attention the moment it was mentioned. Plutosaurus is the villain's personal monster, Ron went on. In this story, Luke Skywalker, well, Nobita, if you're reading the Japanese edition, and his friends eventually defeat it. Harry leaned forward, curiosity flickering in his dark eyes. Do you think I could do the same? I mean, Wizard Rufio used Leviosa to summon a bison, just one letter off from Leviosa to Levifosa. If I made a similar tweak. At that, Ron whipped out the newest issue of Doraemon and jabbered excitedly. So, Pluto Dragon's been beaten already? Harry's heart thumped. Then how exactly did they do it? He grabbed Ron by the shoulders, eyes wide. In that instant, a strange vision flashed behind Harry's eyelids, a world turned upside down, a realm utterly unlike their own. And in that other place, there lurked someone who was almost him, someone he'd only ever known as Lefty. Harry stared at his reflection. His bangs slanted oddly to the right, mirroring the lightning-shaped scar that somehow had shifted to the opposite side of his forehead. He remembered banishing himself from that twisted world by summoning the ancient Pluto dragon through the mirror. Yet here he was again, drawn into another realm of reflections. Stepping into the mirror, or world had unlocked a new trial, the choice. He must either accept or reject his doppelganger. Only by embracing that other self could Harry rekindle the dormant magic within his heart, enough power to light the path to the afterlife with the resurrection stone. But confronting the Pluto dragon, an unstoppable behemoth with no natural enemies, felt like facing an unbridgeable chasm. Then Ron nudged him, opening a random page in a Doraemon comic. There, in vibrant panels, the same Pluto dragon lay defeated, by none other than Luke Skywalker, Nobita, wielding a simple rice ball. Momotaro's onigiri, Ron declared. Legend says any creature that eats one must obey its bearer. Harry blinked in surprise as Ron read aloud. With a soft pop, an ordinary rice ball materialized in midair right before him. From the comic speakers, Doraemon's cheerful voice recounted the onigiri's origins, a gift of loyalty and courage from the hero Momotaro himself. That's it, Harry whispered, a smile tugging at his lips. He leaned back against the sky-blue pillow behind him, rice ball in hand, ready at last to face the dragon and his own hidden self. Harry sat on the edge of his four-poster bed in the Gryffindor dormitory, staring numbly at the brass eagle fixed to the canopy above him. He'd never felt quite so hollow. A soft knock on the door jolted him from his thoughts. When Ron stepped inside, his usually cheerful face was clouded with worry. "Harry, are you anxious about your betrothal?" he blurted. Harry looked up, baffled. "Betrothal? Since when?" Ron ran a hand through his hair. "That's what Sirius and the others have been saying. They reckon you're all worked up about it." Harry sighed and returned his gaze to the eagle. "They've been teasing me, yes, but I'm not engaged to anyone." Ron dropped onto Harry's trunk. "Ginny wanted to come in and check on you too, but Bill wouldn't let her. He's convinced you're just pretending to be scared so you can lure Ginny up here when the adults are busy. And do, well, things we're far too young for." Ron's voice grew guarded. "Since you arrived, you've looked like someone emptied the color from your cheeks. It almost sounds plausible." "Bill's got it wrong," Harry insisted, but he sounded less certain even to himself. Ron's expression softened. "I know you better than anyone, mate, if there's something you need to talk about." Before Harry could answer, Ron's mind wandered back to last week's astronomy lesson. He'd been sitting right behind Harry when Professor Sinistra displayed the chart of constellations. Harry had squinted at the board, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Excuse me, Professor," he'd said, "but could you point out Uranus for us? Your anus, if you will? Or should I come up there and inspect the nether regions myself?" Professor Sinistra's cheeks had flared crimson. She'd cleared her throat, paused, and then moved on as though her ears had deceived her. None of the other students had dared laugh, but Ron never forgot that moment of sheer, cheeky innocence. Now Ron gave Harry a half-smile. "Whatever's going on, I've got your back." Harry managed a small, grateful grin. "Thanks, Ron. I'll let you know if I need anything." Silence settled between them, broken only by the distant murmur of students drifting back to their common room. And for the first time that evening, Harry felt a flicker of relief. Ron shook his head in disbelief. Harry's one of the brightest students at Hogwarts. How could he make such a silly mistake? Harry suspected that was part of why Ron had been a bit distant toward Ginny ever since she and Harry started dating. Harry just shrugged. I suppose Bill's never laid eyes on a golden snidget, so his doubts aren't too surprising. Meanwhile, their year group was abuzz with other curiosities. Michael Corner, Harry's roommate, had once smuggled in a rather risque book filled with animated portraits of enchanting witches. For days afterward, all the boys sported dark circles under their eyes, Ron included. Harry was certain, since he'd sneaked a look himself. Harry couldn't help thinking, if that book hadn't mysteriously disappeared from the Ravenclaw common room, none of them would have gotten any sleep. Even Neville, who usually steered clear of gossip, would have developed bags under his eyes by now. Harry himself might have ended up the same, especially after watching Ron fumble with the book's moving images and attempt to add sound just before it vanished. Michael and a few of the older students have signed up for our little strike team, too. If our plan actually works, you can bet it won't just be Harry who tops out on red-eyed exhaustion. Every boy in Ravenclaw will be running on empty. All right, Ron said, raising an eyebrow. But I've got a feeling Bill's going to give you a hard time about this later. Harry blinked. Bill? Before he became a curse-breaker, he was utterly hooked on Ginny, Ron reminded him with a grin. He won't let you off the hook easily once you tell him you've been off chasing dragons in mirror worlds. Ron paused, his grin fading as he remembered the real question. By the way, what's this about facing a Pluto dragon? Harry swallowed. For the first time, he realized no binding oath or unbreakable vow prevented him from sharing every last detail with Ron. That should have felt relieving, except it made him more uneasy than ever. I've been seeing things in mirrors lately, Harry began, voice low. Anywhere a mirror can show the real world, I feel something always watching me. Last night, I forgot to cover the full-length mirror beside my bed. I got too close, and then, suddenly, I was in another world. My reflection wasn't me. It was another Harry, and he could summon the Pluto dragon through his mirror there. He nearly overwhelmed me before I managed to break free. Harry looked away, running a hand through his hair. If we don't figure this out, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a mirror again, or even out the windows at the lake, or into Ginny's eyes. He met Ron's gaze, helpless. I'm scared of what's waiting on the other side. Thank you so much to the reader who gifted a monthly ticket for the classmate who married the young crown prince, and to everyone else for your recommendations and subscriptions. Your support means the world to me. Chapter 8. Confused Memories. In the pitch-dark basement of number 12 Grimmauld Place, Ron's offhand remark about the Momotaro legend triggered something extraordinary. The old box that held Peter Pettigrew suddenly shot out a beam of silvery light. Like a movie projector waking up, the rough stone wall before them flattened into a giant screen and flickered to life with the figures of Ron and Harry. Without warning, a plush purple sofa drifted down from nowhere and settled on the floor with a gentle thud. Ryan perched cross-legged in the center, while Penelope and Kate squeezed in on either side, their eyes shining with curiosity. "What is this?" Kate whispered, leaning forward. Penelope rolled her eyes. "Is this that surprise you promised us, Brat?" "Shh! Behold the premiere of Harry Potter and the Pluto Dragon," Ryan announced with a flourish. He waved one hand, and in an instant, a sturdy oak table appeared before them, piled high with pastries, chocolates, butterbeer, and frothy pumpkin juice. On the wall screen, the Black family drawing room materialized. Harry's past self sat opposite Ron, who leaned in, voice low and urgent. "Harry," he demanded, "your magic level in that world is exactly the same as his, so how can he control Pluto?" The question struck Harry like a bolt of lightning. In that flash of insight, all the haze clouding his thoughts cleared, leaving behind one startling realization. Ron handed over the Doraemon comic, and Harry flipped rapidly to the part he'd just glimpsed. "Here, where Luke Skywalker feeds Momotaro's rice ball to Pluto," he said, voice low with anticipation. Ron nodded and held the page steady. Harry studied the panels, hoping for a clue that would turn the tide in his own struggle. According to the story, Dr. Sabo, overcome by hatred, had summoned the fearsome Pluto into his inner world, his rage so pure it threatened to consume him entirely. Harry traced the speech bubble with his finger. "See? Dr. Sabo discovered the power of Momotaro's rice ball, but he only knew how to use hatred to feed Pluto's fury. Luke, on the other hand, realizes that love can counterbalance that hatred. He waits until Pluto is momentarily subdued, then offers him the rice ball, calming him and breaking Sabo's hold." As Harry reread the sequence, the memory of his own dark ritual in the mirror came rushing back. He'd tapped into intense negative emotions to summon the Pluto dragon, mirroring Dr. Sabo's method. His brow creased. So the Pluto dragon responds to hatred. But then why did my own anger drive me to banish myself from the mirror world? He muttered, puzzled. He closed his eyes, wrestling with the contradiction. If love could quell such darkness, perhaps the answer to freeing himself and defeating his mirror self lay not in more hatred, but in something far harder to muster. Harry leaned back against the marble fountain's edge, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Turning evil," he began, "really depends on who you are. Some people, once they cross that line, want to scorch the earth. Others will just smooth their hair, slip into a second-hand suit, and waltz down the boulevard. My counterpart in the mirror world isn't even aiming to destroy anything. He only wants to monopolize that realm and drive out the one other thinking being who followed him here, me." Ron twisted his wand between his fingers. "Do you think those negative emotions of his feed the Pluto dragon?" Harry nodded. "Every ounce of anger, bitterness, despair, it's not wasted. It strengthens the beast." Ron hesitated. "Then, Harry, maybe I should go with you." A shadow crossed Harry's face. "If I go in alone, I'll draw out that world's Ron, another you. Can you imagine handling me and him at once? If you cross over, you'd summon two of us. Even I'm not eager for that fight." Ron opened his mouth, but Harry held up a hand. "Believe me, confronting evil Harry is hard enough by myself. Bring you along, and we'd be up to our knees in dark versions of us." He swung his legs over the basin and stood. The fountain rippled, its toy surface shimmering with magic. In that mirror world, no one lives except the mirror beasts, and him. He only exists because I accidentally unlocked the realm. This isn't about defeating an enemy so much as reclaiming a part of myself, a shadow I never meant to let loose. Harry slipped his wand into his robes and met Ron's steady gaze. "You'll stay here?" Ron squared his shoulders. "I'll be right where you left me. If you need backup, I'm there." Harry offered a brief nod. Then he stepped forward into the water, and the world around him folded and shifted in a heartbeat, carrying him into the unknown. Harry felt a sudden, unexplainable clarity as soon as he saw it. He barely noticed Ron beside him. Ron, who was certain Harry thought him impressively powerful and was laughing so hard he'd nearly chipped a tooth. Ignoring his friend's bewildered expression, Harry strode straight to the floor-to-ceiling mirror by the door and reached out his hand. This time, he didn't have to smash the glass repeatedly to find the way through. That doorway existed in his mind, he realized, unlocked the moment he truly believed in it. Perhaps any witch or wizard who has crossed into a mirror dimension learns this spell, as Tonks hinted, a magic so natural it feels instinctive. A sudden, icy chill ran through Harry's veins, as though he'd plunged into freezing water. Then, in the blink of an eye, the mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and a grand manor appeared before him. Its furnishings and floor plan were the exact opposite of the Black family's ancestral home. Without hesitation, Harry stepped forward and passed through another full-length mirror standing against the far wall of this reverse world. He recalled that here, one could travel not only through mirrors, but through any reflective surface, even a calm lake, and emerge from a different-looking glass elsewhere. Moments later, Harry climbed out of a mirror formed by a shallow puddle beside a crumbling country lane. He glanced up and froze. Before him lay the shell of a once stately mansion. The left side of the top floor had been completely blown away, leaving jagged walls exposed to the sky. The silence pressed in like a living thing, and Harry knew he was no longer in his world, or in the Black family's home, but something far stranger still. He recognized the place immediately. Godric's Hollow, the old Potter family home. In the real world, he'd never set foot here, but in the mirror world, he had. And so had another version of himself. This other Harry carried every memory he'd ever had, from infancy to the present, memories he'd long since buried beneath the tides of his subconscious. The first time he'd crossed into the mirror realm, he'd been drawn to this very spot, and had suffered a bitter, crushing defeat. A harsh screech of metal grated through the silence as the rusty iron door swung open. Beyond the gate stood a figure identical to his own, tall, serious, unflinching. Harry stared as if gazing into a mirror. "Hello, me. I am the one who claims everything," the other Harry answered, his voice calm and cold. "Does this dead world fascinate you so?" Harry asked, forcing himself to remain composed. His reflection's calm tone felt like a warning from an old friend, and he hated himself for not seeing it sooner. Clenching his right fist, he brought it up to his temple in frustration. "Of course you don't understand," he muttered, regretting his own blindness. Harry's reflection leaped forward, wand raised and eyes blazing. "I don't know," Harry spat, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. "I am you," the figure purred, every syllable unnervingly familiar. "I know your every thought, your every secret. You're planning an ambush, using the dark spell you invented." Harry's grip on his own wand tightened. "Precisely." The reflection smiled. "Your mirror of Veritas only works because light refracts off its surface. But you forgot one thing. I'm you too, and I already know the countercharm." Harry's double flicked his wrist. An instant later, the placid sky above the lake trembled. Every mote of mist condensed into a shimmering horizontal plane. From that mirror-smooth surface erupted a colossal head, a Pluto dragon, scales blazing ruby red, mane of molten gold rippling down its neck, eyes twin coals of blackened fire. Its roar shattered the stillness, raw magic crackling through the air, threatening to consume everything in its path. Harry's heart hammered as the dragon lunged, nostrils flaring, claws scraping the mirrored water. Behind him, his double's voice rang out, calm and taunting. "In your memory, how many people sleep in our dormitory?" 7, Harry replied on a hiss, refusing to show panic. "And their names," came the challenge. A cold smile touched Harry's lips as he raised his wand. "Trying to stall me, are you?" Magic surged in his veins. He would not be outwitted. After all, no one knew Harry Potter better than Harry Potter himself. "It doesn't matter. Nothing can stop it." Harry's words echoed through the mirror world. He brought a hand to the right side of his forehead, feeling the familiar ridge of his lightning-shaped scar beneath his fingertips. He began to tick off names, voice low and steady. "Ron, Neville, Michael, Terry, Anthony, me, and—" He hesitated as if searching his memory. "And—" Taking a steadying breath, Harry met his own reflected gaze. "This is precisely why I've come here, at this pivotal moment, just before my engagement." He stood perfectly still, determination shining in his eyes as he prepared for whatever lay beyond the glass. Acknowledgements. Many thanks to Taishi Yumiksu for the monthly ticket and to all my classmates for their recommendations and subscriptions. Chapter 9. Two Become One. Even in the endless summer of Britain's far north, just below the Arctic Circle, the sun still hung low in the northeast sky at 8 o'clock. In the mirror realm, this twilight persisted, bathing everything in a copper light. Beneath that glow lay a magnificent dragon, nearly 100 feet from snout to tail, its leonine head crowned by ribbed membranous wings, its body sheathed in smoldering red scales. Before the beast stood two identical boys, distinguished only by their expressions, one cool and reserved, the other warm and eager. The serious boy frowned, voice quiet but firm. "You came because part of my memory is missing," he said. "If I'm to claim the resurrection stone, and perhaps even bring my mother back, I need your help." The other boy met his gaze steadily. "Resurrecting my mother is the one thing I alone can do." The first shook his head, glancing at the dragon. But I'm not strong enough on my own, he admitted. Despite his self-doubt, there was a fierce confidence in his tone. The resurrection stone is like Momotaro's rice ball, the very thing that tamed a Pluto dragon, yet I lack the pieces and the power to control it. Will you help me? Mirror Harry studied him for a long beat. You promise you won't lie? A soft exhale. I swear it. What must I do? Silence fell, broken only by the dragon's low rumble. Above them, the unsetting sun gleamed red, as if watching their pact take shape. As the last vestige of hostility faded, the Pluto dragon before him, a hulking beast with razor-sharp fangs, dissolved into a curling column of black smoke and drifted off into the night sky. Come back to me, Harry cried, stretching his right hand toward the mirror. On the other side, his counterpart in the mirror world offered a helpless smile and reached back with his left hand. The instant their fingertips met, a crackling surge of power rippled through the air. All around them, reality splintered like shattered glass, revealing jagged, inky fissures in the fabric of existence. Harry's eyes snapped open. He stood in the grand foyer of the Black family estate. Only this was the version of the Black home that existed on the other side of the looking-glass. Directly across the room loomed a floor-to-ceiling mirror, and on the far side of its glimmering surface, Ron was pressing his face against the glass, frantically searching for any sign of Harry's reflection. 15 minutes earlier, Ron had watched in stunned silence as Harry simply stepped through the mirror. Yet when Ron peered inside, there had been nothing. No gleam of Harry's eyes, no shimmer of his robes. Sirius had grabbed Ron's arm, desperately urging him away from the barrier, but panic had driven Ron to shove Sirius aside. He'd mashed his forehead against the cold glass, willing the barrier to give just as Harry had before him. Then, unexpectedly, a gentle hand had rested on the back of Ron's head, nudging him backward with soft authority. He'd tumbled away, bewildered, and heard only a distant echo of Harry's voice before everything had gone dark. Now, the moment Harry truly returned, Ron's anxious blue eyes met his own through the mellow sheen of the mirror. Harry took a tentative step forward, heart pounding, knowing that the bonds between their two worlds had never been more fragile or more alive. He'd drawn his wand in a panic, ready to strike, when a familiar voice cut through his fear. Ron, I told you not to stand in front of the mirror. Just wait out here until I'm done. Harry brushed aside Ron's hand, annoyance flickering across his face. Ron tried to grin. I was worried about you. Lucky you didn't show up while I was working, Harry muttered. I doubt I would have had the patience for interruptions. The truth weighed on him. His mother's resurrection attempt had just failed. If Ron hadn't appeared at the right moment, or if he had no other allies to turn to, like Ryan, Harry might have been sorely tempted to throttle his best friend. You still haven't tried the last incantation, Harry said, voice low. Someday you'll need to summon that phoenix to stand a chance against the Pluto dragon. He imagined it clearly, a world turned inside out, two versions of himself standing face to face, wands at the ready. From one wand, a colossal dragon of shadow would rise, from the other, a golden phoenix, brilliant and new. The war would begin in that instant, but Harry knew the real victory would come long before the spells were cast. In the end, love would triumph over hate. Justice has triumphed over evil. How perfect! Just utter a few words and it's done. Ron slumped, his enthusiasm deflating like a canceled birthday surprise. Hey, don't forget it's me they're praising. Harry folded his arms, voice low but firm. Even villains have their limits. There are things I still care about, and I'm not about to lie. He sighed, frustration evident. So why is the very first task already this impossible? Deep beneath Smith Castle, in a cold, torchlit chamber, Kate peered at a flickering projection dancing across the rough stone wall. The strange contraption pulsed with an eerie glow, powered, she realized with a shiver, by a fragment of Peter Pettigrew's soul. A mission? She murmured, brow knitting in confusion. Nearby, Penelope stretched out on a dusty bench, half listening. Does this explain why the finale of Harry Potter and the Otherworldly Adventure fell apart? It just stopped, she mused. Kate's eyes narrowed to slits. This so-called mission is your responsibility, brat. No excuses. Penelope bolted upright at the glare. She cleared her throat, flicking a look at Ryan. Honestly, this is anticlimactic. 2 lines of dialogue and suddenly Harry throws in the towel? utterly dull. Her words echoed in the silence, the pale light of Pettigrew's soul casting long shadows around them. The grand stone chamber of the Skywalker alchemy workshop was silent, except for the soft drip of water echoing through the arched ceiling. Flickering sconces cast long shadows on the walls, illuminating the ornate frame of a floor-length mirror that dominated one end of the hall. It was here, hidden somewhere in Europe's winding backstreets, that only 3 of these secret workshops existed, each entrusted with the realm's most dangerous magical experiments. Harry tightened his grip on his wand, his breath visible in the cool air. Across from him stood himself, the hairy creature he had fought not long ago. Though the fight remained unrecorded, Ryan, the workshop's self-appointed chronicler, still hadn't edited that encounter. The memory lingered in Harry's mind like a smudged photograph. "I thought this was just a private preview," Ryan said, shifting on his feet. "Part of some literary drama demonstration." He glanced at Ron, whose blotchy grin betrayed excitement. "Doraemon, Summoner's Kingdom. Official release in Diagon Alley is the 25th. Not supposed to be out yet." "Yeah," Ron admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "I got an early copy. I couldn't help myself." His eyes sparkled with boyish enthusiasm. "It's incredible. Totally worth bending the rules." Kate, standing between them, pressed her small round face against the mirror's frame. Her cheeks puffed out in excitement. "Harry," she breathed, pointing at the mirror's surface. "Can you really do it?" Harry met her gaze, then turned back to his reflected double. The figure in the glass raised a wand in warning. Its eyes flashed with reflected torchlight. "I have to," Harry said quietly. He advanced until his fingertips brushed the icy surface. The mirror rippled under his touch, as if it were made of water. Images flickered in the glass, shadowy forests, twisting staircases, and something that moved just beyond sight. Ron took a half step forward. "Just watch out for the mirror beasts. They dwell in that world most of the time. If you break through, they'll be the first to attack." Harry nodded, focusing on the strange dance of light in the glass. His heart pounded, but beneath the fear was a steeliness born of necessity. He drew in a steadying breath, felt the fine cracks of magic humming at the mirror's edge. "Wish me luck," he said softly to Kate and Ron. Then, with a decisive step, he passed through the surface. For a heartbeat, the chamber was still. The sconces guttered as if startled, and then Harry was gone. Kate let out a small gasp. Ron's jaw dropped, wand halfway raised. Ryan scribbled furiously in his parchment notebook, already plotting how to frame this chapter. But the silence never lasted long in the Skywalker alchemy workshop. As ripples faded from the mirror's surface, the faintest whisper of movement came from the other side, and Harry's next trial began. Harry's fingertips traced the smooth surface of the mirror as he muttered to himself. "They won't awaken from the mirror world unless an intelligent life form, like us in the real world, intervenes." He paused, then added softly, "And just to be clear, I'm not actually traveling into the mirror world. I'm only using it as a kind of transit hub." Ron frowned and folded his arms. "How do you know so much about it?" Harry's eyes glittered with quiet confidence as he kept his hand against the glass. "The one who taught me, the very first truly sentient being to appear in the mirror world, shared all his secrets with me. Information in the mirror world draws toward him like iron to a magnet. Once we merged, I inherited that knowledge." Still probing the mirror's edge, Harry demonstrated. With a fluid motion, his hand slipped halfway through the surface, as though stepping through an invisible doorway. "See? Even here in our world, I can navigate the mirror world's pathways." Ron's brows shot up. "Okay, but are you absolutely sure Ginny is in her room right now?" Harry asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty despite the confident display. "Of course she is," Ron snapped, bristling at the implication that he might have been mistaken. "She's been holed up in her bedroom all day. Hasn't even come out for lunch." Harry withdrew his hand from the mirror and stood up straight, determination settling on his features. "All right then, let's go." Harry's retort died on his lips. "Wait, it's here? But He stumbled back, losing his grip on the mirror's polished frame. In the same instant, a girl tumbled through the portal and right into his arms. She had long, copper-red hair and wore a gown that shimmered like molten gold. Harry's heart pounded as he caught her, eyes wide with shock. The girl blinked up at him, equally startled, her golden dress pooling around them both. Neither spoke. All at once, the world felt impossibly small and impossibly full of wonder. Chapter 10. Bill Weasley Ottery. St. Catchpole, usually the very picture of rural tranquility, has been buzzing with activity of late. Visitors in the most peculiar attire drift into the village as if summoned by some masked ball. Long cloaks, strange symbols, an air of conspiratorial mystery. When curious locals press them for answers, the strangers offer only gibberish. The savior is betrothed to a girl in your village. Such nonsense. There's only one savior. Everyone knows that, and certainly nobody here is aware of any maiden set to wed him. Whispers have spread that these oddly dressed newcomers are nothing more than cultists, and prudence has kept many villagers at arm's length. What's more baffling is how the strangers arrive. No carts, no horses, no brooms or portkeys. Yet there they are, emerging seemingly out of thin air, behind hedges, fences, or the shadow of an oak tree. Some suspect they've tunneled underground. Others aren't sure what to believe. Among the suspicious townsfolk, none is harsher in his judgment than old Jack, whose temper is as gnarled as the oak at the village entrance. He swears that ever since these newcomers arrived, his prize hens have stopped laying eggs. Each day at dusk, Jack settles himself beneath that old oak, leaning on his cane, ready to drive off any stranger foolish enough to stray too close to the gate. This evening's sunset blaze found Jack once more stationed under the tree's sprawling boughs. He squinted at a lone figure approaching along the dirt road, a figure garbed in a dark robe, the hood pulled low. The stranger paused under the dying light, as if pondering the next step. Jack straightened his back, tightened his grip on the cane, and prepared to give this newest interloper a piece of his mind. The sun beat down mercilessly, but the stranger standing at the village edge seemed utterly unconcerned by the midsummer heat. He was obviously a man, tall and lean, his dark hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail. But everything else about him struck old Jack as bizarre. A small, fan-shaped trinket dangled from one ear, and he wore a heavy black leather coat fastened with a series of metal zippers, whose purpose was anyone's guess. His boots were equally odd, the leather studded with scale-like ridges that caught the sunlight. Old Jack tapped his gnarled cane twice on the dusty road. "You're not welcome in this village," he barked. The stranger shifted, meeting Jack's glare with calm, inscrutable eyes. "It's me," he said quietly. For a moment, Jack's anger faltered as he recognized the voice. "Wait, Bill? Bill Weasley? Is that really you? The red-haired kid?" At Jack's words, the man let out a short laugh and loosened his coat. He ruffled his ponytail, revealing a flash of fiery hair at the nape of his neck. Jack lowered his cane and stared for a moment, astonished. "Good to see you, Jack," Bill Weasley said, his smile warm but guarded. Though Bill's family lived just outside the village boundaries, the Weasleys had always been welcome here. They were a clan of 7 children, Bill the eldest, twins among the younger set, and their father frequently brought them all in to trade or visit. In Jack's mind, they'd always been as much villagers as anyone born within the gates. "We're practically neighbors," Jack said, relief spreading across his face. He reached out to clasp Bill's arm. "What brings you back in such unique attire?" Bill glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I've been traveling. Lots has changed since I left." Jack's eyes darkened with worry. "You should be careful. Lately there have been some strange characters skulking around these parts. Tell me everything. Right now." Bill nodded, the playful light in his eyes giving way to a more serious expression. As they moved toward the village square, old Jack wheeled his cane beside them, eager to hear the full story. The day's heat was forgotten. Something far more urgent had just begun. Bill settled into the armchair by the hearth, finally home after years overseas, as his grandfather, old Jack, fixed him with a stern look. "So," old Jack began, folding his arms, "you spent all that time working in Egypt, eh? I hope you didn't pick up too many of their exotic habits." Bill shrugged, brushing a loose strand of hair behind his ear. "I learned a lot, handled vaults, deciphered runes, negotiated with goblins. But I'm done traveling for now. They've just transferred me back to the London office as a clerk." Old Jack harumphed. "Then mind your manners, and your wardrobe. You're back in Britain. You need to carry yourself like a proper English gentleman, not some foreign rabble-rouser." He glanced down at Bill's rolled-up sleeves and the relaxed collar of his shirt. That outfit won't do. Bill couldn't help but smile. He'd grown used to old Jack's old-fashioned notions. To keep their conversations smooth, Bill always translated his Wizarding World experiences into terms his Muggle grandfather could grasp. The enchanted vaults became state-of-the-art security, goblins turned into hard-nosed bankers, and spells were simply special protective measures. "It's still a bank," Bill said lightly, "just one with more reliable safes." Old Jack's scowl softened. "Well, as long as you remember which side of the channel you're on, if I catch you sporting any more of those Egyptian trinkets..." "I'll consult head office first," Bill teased. He leaned back, feeling the familiar warmth of home settle around him. Despite all the magic and adventure, it was these quiet moments by the fire, bridging two very different worlds, that he'd missed most. And for now, that was more than enough. Bill had returned to Britain for one purpose: to persuade Harry and Ginny to delay their engagement. It seemed far too soon, he was sure of that, and he wasn't naive about how his parents would react when they found out. The more he thought about it, the more anxious he felt. His doubts began to fade after his chance conversation with old Jack. Bill realized that, just as Jack had once unfairly judged every wizard who wandered into the village, he himself had been letting prejudice get the better of him. After all, his parents and Ginny had agreed to the match. Perhaps he was the only one worried. Old Jack, who had watched Bill grow up, had warmed to him despite Bill's unconventional attire. Maybe, Bill thought, if his family spent a little time with Harry, they'd see for themselves what an honorable young man he was. Emboldened, Bill returned to the burrow that evening, convinced he needn't meddle. By 8:30, Ginny was flitting about upstairs, trying on one gown after another in front of her bedroom mirror. Bill paused in the hallway, listening to the rustle of fabric and Ginny's soft laughter. Everything felt right. Then, without warning, a shape slid out from the looking-glass, a dark figure with Harry's unmistakable silhouette. In the blink of an eye, it crossed the room and seized Ginny's arm. She let out a startled cry that echoed down the stairs, and Bill's heart stopped. The intruder was wearing Harry's face. But this was no gentle cousin come to tease her about her newest dress choice. This doppelganger moved with deadly intent. Bill's mind raced. He had believed he'd come home for one thing, only to find something far more urgent unfolding under his own roof. "Ginny!" he roared, and charged up the stairs, ready to face the impossible. Bill had amassed every copy of the Daily Prophet that featured Harry's photo. He was absolutely convinced the papers couldn't be wrong, and he swore he would stop this wedding, even if Merlin himself tried to stand in his way. Later, after Ginny and Harry had spoken quietly together, Harry looked up at Ron and sighed. "So Bill saw me with Ginny just now?" Ron wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. "It's bad, Harry. Bill's already prejudiced against you." Harry's eyes narrowed. This time, before the engagement party even starts, Bill's determined to drive a wedge between Ginny and me? Ginny bit her lip, her face fallen. She had dreamed of a warm family celebration. Everyone gathered to congratulate the happy couple. Instead, Ron's uneasy look told the story. Bill would show no mercy. Harry turned to Ron. "Is he like Percy was, back when we were kids?" Ron shook his head. "Not exactly. Think of Bill as a blend of Percy and George, brilliant and responsible like Percy, but with George's flair for adventure and risk-taking." Harry frowned. "Then why is he so dead set against us?" Ron could only shrug. "I wish I knew." Harry stared at his best friend, puzzled. With Bill the way he was, this engagement was about to become a whole lot more complicated than either of them had expected. Bill burst into the room, eyes narrowed at Harry. "Ginny's the only sister we have," he began stiffly. "We all love her more than anything." Harry shifted on his feet, glancing at Ron. Ron curled his lip. "Percy, Fred, and George know exactly what kind of person you are," he snapped. "Charlie actually trusts Ginny to decide things for herself. But you swoop in with your Ginny, I'm only doing this for your own good routine every single time." Bill's jaw tightened. "I'm just trying to protect her." Harry cleared his throat and looked at Ginny. She sat on the edge of the bed, pale and tightly controlled. At Harry's silent question, she gave a small, bitter nod. Before anyone could speak again, a voice unreeled from the hallway. "Alohomora." The door clicked open to reveal Sirius Black striding in. He planted himself between Bill and the others, eyes blazing. I told you, Harry's just nervous. There's only Ron in here. That story about Harry emerging from a mirror and whisking Ginny away? Absolute rubbish. If she's actually here, I'll eat my shoe. Bill opened his mouth to argue, but Sirius held up a hand. Then Sirius's gaze dropped to Harry's arms, where a head of vivid red hair peeked out. Recognition, followed by astonishment, flickered across his face. Ron's voice cracked in relief and something like fear as he muttered, "That was fast." Bill shoved Sirius aside and spun to face him. "Have you forgotten about the Flu Network? You're Harry Potter, the very one who lied to my sister." Chapter 11, Mirror World. The entire charade collapsed almost as soon as it began. The moment Bill demanded the Black family's Flu Network code in that off-putting tone, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, sensing something was badly amiss, had apparated into the Burrow's basement kitchen. They charged upstairs to the third floor and skidded to a halt outside Harry's bedroom door, certain that Bill must be here to find him. After all, they all knew how strongly Harry objected to Bill's sudden marriage plans. 10 minutes later, Mrs. Weasley had Bill firmly by the shoulder, her voice rising with every word. "Honestly, William, why are you acting like my brothers did back in the day? Ginny isn't a child. She's a Hogwarts student. You must learn to let go." Bill bristled but said nothing, his lips pressed into a stubborn line. Mr. Weasley stepped between them and turned to Harry with an encouraging smile. "Don't worry, Harry. I remember how Molly's brothers treated me when I first started courting her. In the end, it was me who ran off with your mother." Before Harry could answer, Mr. Weasley's eyes lit up with curiosity. He strode over to the tall, dusty mirror propped against the hallway wall and tapped its frame. "Bill tells me you and Ginny slipped through this mirror. Is that right?" Harry nodded. "Yes, it's the one." "Mr. Wood." Weasley gave the glass an appraising look and then laid a hopeful hand on Harry's shoulder. "Do you think you could show us how Ginny returned through here? It might come in handy, just in case we ever need another way back." Harry met his father's eyes and with a small, rueful smile, nodded again. "All right, but be ready, for the mirror is darker than it looks." Arthur Weasley stood before them in a dignified black wizard's robe, its sleeves trimmed with intricate gold embroidery. Yet his eyes sparkled with the same boyish wonder Harry had always known. Every detail of this new magic fascinated him. Harry took a deep breath and began his explanation, knowing there was no shortcut. He started at the beginning. His return to the Dursleys' home just days earlier, the unsettling sensation that something in the mirror was watching him. As Harry described how the glass had seemed to breathe and shift, drawing him in, his audience leaned forward. Bill, who'd only moments before been on the receiving end of Mrs. Weasley's scolding, stilled in surprise, while Mrs. Weasley herself forgot to fuss. Sirius paced a few steps, eyes alight. There, hidden behind the familiar reflection, lay an entire world that challenged everything they believed about magic. "Is there a Pluto dragon in it?" someone whispered. The idea of mirror-born creatures set imaginations soaring. Bill's expression darkened thoughtfully. Charlie, always the boldest of the Weasley brood, second only to his youngest sister Ginny, would undoubtedly give up everything to step through that looking-glass. As he watched Harry's solemn face, Bill clenched and unclenched his fists, partly in excitement, partly in frustration with Ron, who had shown the least interest and now lounged idly at the table. "Why don't we?" Arthur began, turning to Sirius. "Exactly," Sirius said at the same moment. "We could." "No," Mrs. Weasley's sharp cry cut them off. She rose from her chair, eyes blazing with protective resolve. "We're not sending anyone into an unknown world without a plan." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed her words. A doorway to another reality might lie in that mirror, but before anyone ventured through, they would need more answers, and more than a touch of careful strategy. Mrs. Weasley had barely sat down, exhausted after yet another round of scolding, when she sprang to her feet. Her eyes gleamed with an almost unearthly light. "I absolutely forbid." Before she could finish, Sirius Black shot back. "Didn't you hear Harry? He said there really is another self in there, his dark side." Arthur Weasley nodded. "Harry's a good lad, and if there's an evil side, it sounds like something we can handle." "Enough from you grown-ups," Mrs. Weasley's voice cracked with fury. She looked around the cluttered Burrow living room and saw that her words had the opposite effect of what she'd intended. The children were positively shining with excitement at the prospect. Even Bill, who usually maintained a composed front, had a glint in his eye. "I'm in," Bill declared, existing only halfway between a serious volunteer and a boy who couldn't resist a good adventure. "My mother always called me Nymphadora," Tonks piped up, her violet hair flickering as if stirred by her own enthusiasm. She bounded out from behind the doorframe, where Remus Lupin stood quietly, a soft, approving smile on his face. Mrs. Weasley threw up her hands in exasperation. "Honestly, what sort of child are you all turning into?" Sirius grinned at Tonks. "You do know you'll marry Remus someday, right?" Tonks crossed her arms and glowered. "Mum, I'm only 19. That brought a round of laughter from the younger Weasley siblings. Everyone, that is, except Ronald, who shot his hand into the air as if he were legging for the winning goal at the Quidditch World Cup. Ronald Weasley!" Mrs. Weasley drew him aside, her cheeks still pink with indignation. In that moment of playful chaos, Harry sat quietly on the edge of the couch, Draco Malfoy at his side. Both of them watched their makeshift family roll forward with an eagerness that could have been contagious. Mrs. Weasley took a deep breath, pinned Harry with a gentle but firm stare, and whispered, "All right, but only because it's for Harry." The room fell silent, and for a heartbeat, everyone, adult, child, and everything in between, was united in one purpose: to confront the darkness lurking inside their friend and to prove, once and for all, that even the blackest shadow can be brought into the light. Harry could see Ron about to blurt everything out, so he reflexively reached to cover his brother's mouth, only to feel Ginny's hand clamp down on his wrist. He frowned at her, puzzled. "If you let him speak," Ginny whispered, pressing a finger to her lips, "Mum and the others will think you dragged me into all this." She bit her lip to keep her voice low, then giggled and huddled close. "And even if they figure it out later, they won't be angry." Before Harry could ask what she meant, a cool voice cut in. "You passed." Bill stood a few paces away, expression steady. He had just witnessed Harry's hesitation and how he'd deferred to Ginny's quick thinking. With that single nod, Bill let him know he'd won his approval. As Bill strode out of the room, Ginny turned to Harry, threw him a victorious thumbs up, and beamed. Harry exhaled, a mixture of relief and awe making his heart pound. Just moments ago, he'd been on the brink of disgrace, sneaking off alone into a perilous mirror realm, confronting its deadly dragon, then using untested magic to yank Ginny in after him. That kind of stunt would have drawn fierce rebukes from every adult, Sirius included. Instead, by the slimmest of margins, Ron had stepped forward at the right moment, drawing everyone's attention away from Harry's reckless spellcasting. And Bill, having seen Harry quietly follow Ginny's lead, had quietly approved. "You planned this?" Harry whispered, throat suddenly dry. Ginny only winked, pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, and skipped toward the door. "Good job, big brother." Harry watched her go, marveling once more at his little sister's daring and her unshakable confidence. Chapter 9. Reflections and Revelations. Harry sat alone in the Gryffindor common room, replaying Ginny's shy smile over and over in his mind. He'd always dismissed her as just another bright, cheerful Weasley, a little too innocent, a little too straightforward. Yet today, something in her eyes had told him there was much more beneath the surface. "Girls," he muttered, "are never as simple as they seem." "Precisely," came a familiar voice from the shadows. Sirius Black stepped forward, the firelight playing across his dark hair and high cheekbones. Once the evening's guests had departed, he'd chosen to remain being. Handsome, brilliant, and born to one of the oldest pureblood families, Sirius could have had any number of admirers. Instead, he'd perfected the art of being unattached, largely thanks to far too many scheming debutantes. The only person he truly cared about was his younger brother, Regulus, who'd practically taken up residence in Sirius's old bedroom. If Regulus weren't already so content to stay home, Sirius joked that he'd have turned the Black family manor into the perfect site for Harry and Ginny's engagement party, and perhaps even bequeathed the place to his godson. Harry chuckled. "You really set on hooking us up, then?" "With all my heart," Sirius replied, flashing a teasing grin before settling into an armchair by the hearth. They lapsed into comfortable silence. broken only by the crackle of the fire and by the new and unsettling thought kindling in Harry's chest. Thousands of miles away, atop a jagged cliff in northern Devon, lay Smith Castle. Inside its ancient stone walls, Penelope Masters and Ryan Cross were studying a flickering projection that had abruptly cut off mid-broadcast. The program, titled Harry Potter and the Otherworldly Journey, had originated from the nearby village of Axminster before vanishing without warning. "Do you think Potter's already encountered this so-called mirror world?" Penelope asked, her brow furrowed. Until recently, the mirror world had been a mere theoretical construct, an arcane rumor whispered among a few scholars. Ryan tapped a slender wand against the crystalline display. "From what we can tell, the mirror world is split into 3 layers. The first layer is essentially a perfect reflection of our own reality. It exists in parallel, with its own rudimentary magic that echoes ours." Penelope leaned closer. "A flawless reflection might sound harmless, but if their magic mimics ours, it becomes dangerous," Ryan finished. "Even a minor disturbance over there could ripple back here, twisting simple reflections into grotesque distortions." A low rumble of thunder rolled across the Devon coast as the projection flickered anew. Whatever lay beyond that shimmering surface promised more questions, and potentially far darker answers. "Everything inside that realm is the reverse of our world," Ryan explained, leaning forward with a spark in his eye. "I don't follow," Kate said, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "Okay, picture this. The second layer is ruled by mirror beasts. They feed on human thoughts and live in an endless world of reflections, essentially a mirror of a mirror. Then there's the third layer. It isn't a place at all, but the shadow side of the human heart. It has no physical form. When your mind crosses into it, it awakens an alternate you, and that other you can slip back through the first layer into reality." Kate frowned. "Wait, so did Potter actually enter the second layer in the real world?" Ryan flashed a sly grin. "Now you're flirting with spoilers." He sat back and added, "Speaking of which, our Skywalker Alchemy Workshop is gearing up to release Harry Potter and the Resurrection Stone, but we won't air it until Voldemort is finally defeated. On top of that, we're launching a documentary series on the magic world, plus an exclusive reality show called Death Eaters Wilderness Survival. It's going to be legendary. Special thanks to my classmates Geo Shitstick and Jiang Dong for their monthly support, and thank you to everyone else for subscribing, recommending, and tuning in." Chapter 12, 455, Summoning the Pluto Dragon. "I'm ready." Harry Potter stretched out his arms and lifted his chin. Though it was only a few simple words, 2 voices emerged from his mouth in perfect harmony, intertwining like twin melodies. In a hidden dimension, unreachable to any onlooker, another pair of hands closed around Harry's. A faceless, shadowy figure slid in to merge with his own. Then, with a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very air, magic flared between them. "Who?" A deafening blast echoed from the marble basin before Harry. The placid water erupted, and a massive crimson head broke the surface. Its antler-like horns curled into a regal crown. A rippling, fiery mane framed its neck. Dark golden eyes glowed with ancient power, and each beat of its colossal wings sent tremors through the surrounding stones. All at once, the world quivered beneath the might of the oldest, most formidable dragon in history, the Pluto dragon. "It can't be," murmured Albus Dumbledore, gripping the Elder Wand so tightly that his knuckles whitened. As the dragon rose into the night sky, its immense form blocking out the stars, the headmaster's awestruck gaze drifted toward Rubus Hagrid. The gentle giant's mouth hung open, eyes shining with wonder. Harry felt raw power coursing through him, as vast and fathomless as the sea. He kept his arms steady, guiding the dragon's ascent with a calm confidence he'd never known before. Above them all, the Pluto dragon wheeled in a stately arc, its roar rolling like thunder across the grounds of Hogwarts and heralding the dawn of an extraordinary new alliance. 3 figures remained once the dust settled, and there, unmistakably, stood Tom Riddle himself. Even he couldn't help but clutch at his chest, doubling over in surprise. Hagrid, however, like Harry the Summoner, behaved as though nothing extraordinary had just occurred. Riddle fixed Harry with a cold glare, his knuckles whitening as he squeezed his wand. Harry's voice rang out, carrying an unfamiliar resonance. "Return," he commanded. In an instant, the colossal Pluto dragon, its black fangs bared, its roar frozen mid-threat, dissolved into a swirl of smoke and ash at his command. The strange echo in Harry's voice vanished just as quickly as the dragon. His tone was gentle again. "Are you all right?" he asked, but all his concern was directed at Ginny. Brushing a lock of hair from her face, he gathered her into his arms. "Harry, do it again," someone cried, breathless with excitement. Hagrid's small, beetle-black eyes sparkled with pure delight, the kind of wonder Harry had never seen, not even when Norberta first hatched. Charlie, sitting beside Bill a little further back, wore the exact same expression. Harry felt his cheeks warm. And so, in the most unexpected fashion, he met Ginny's brothers for the very first time. Fred and George collapsed in peals of laughter, pointing at Percy, who stood a few paces away, drenched in sweat. "Harry, do it again. We haven't seen nearly enough of Percy's disastrous moment." Fred howled. "He looked like he peed his pants," George added, clutching his sides. Ron scrambled to his feet, gripping the table so hard his knuckles whitened. His face was ashen and his hands still trembled. "Harry, how can you even talk after facing a Pluto dragon?" Sirius Black's eyes were rimmed with red, equal parts fear and fury etched across his features. Only moments ago, he dared to hope that Harry had already defeated Voldemort outright, that whatever happened in the mirror world couldn't hurt him. Now he realized how recklessly bold his godson truly was. Terror gripped him at the thought of never seeing Harry again. Anger flared at Harry's headlong courage. For the first time, Sirius felt a pang of resentment at how much Harry mirrored his father. Just as daredevil, just as determined to face danger alone. He remembered how James had once insisted on confronting Snape single-handedly, as if to prove himself worthy of Lily's love. After more losses than victories, he'd reluctantly accepted that the Marauders had to stick together, sparking a long, storied feud with Snape that had lasted throughout their school years. Sirius watched Harry so fondly that he slipped back into memories of simpler days. He leaned forward, a roguish grin spreading across his face. "Come on, lad. What's the worst that could happen? You just don't see yourself in the mirror." Harry rolled his eyes, but before he could tease back, Mrs. Weasley's voice cut through the laughter. "Why take such a risk?" Her eyes were bright with happy tears as she swept forward and enfolded both Harry and Ginny in a fierce hug. Arthur rose to his feet, clearly brimming with excitement. He looked poised to launch into a grand speech worthy of Hagrid himself. But one stern look from Molly sent him sitting back down, cheeks reddening. Nearby, Percy stood ramrod straight, glaring at Fred and George. They were already howling with laughter. "Percy's giving Dad a lecture again," George crowed, doubling over. "Don't start this, Father," Percy protested, but Fred only snorted. "Come on, Percy. It's a celebration," he teased, and the twins darted off, weaving between Bill and Charlie, who exchanged amused glances. "There are so many people here," George called back over his shoulder. "Isn't that the whole point?" Fred shot back, elbowing his brother in mock exasperation. Harry noticed Professor Dumbledore standing a little apart, smiling fondly but clearly unaccustomed to such a boisterous crowd on Privet Drive. Tonks, ever the showstopper, flicked her hair, now a brilliant, fiery red to suit the occasion, and proclaimed, "We've got this under control now." It was true. The entire Weasley clan had converged on number 10, Rose Road, flanked by members of the Order of the Phoenix, all because of that astonishing Mirror World incident. Tomorrow, Harry and Ginny would be officially engaged, and everyone had turned out to celebrate. Bill clapped his hands together. "Since tomorrow's the big day, shall we throw a proper party?" Charlie grinned, tipping his head to the sky. "And what about some magical fireworks?" A ripple of delighted agreement swept through the gathering. With laughter and chatter rising into the evening air, it was clear that whatever challenges lay ahead, family and friends would face them together, tomorrow and every day after. Just think, imagine the sky filled with a shower of shooting stars. How spectacular that would be. Daedalus Digg, Dean's guardian in the magical world, couldn't hide his excitement. He clasped his hands together. "Better make your goodbyes now." Professor McGonagall's stern voice cut through the fanfare. "When Voldemort fell last time, Minister Millicent Bulstrode resigned because of the chaos you caused. Digg, she was on our side. Then that imbecile Fudge took the reins. Moody growled, his magical eye spinning a baleful red. He shoved a hand into his pocket and wrapped his other fingers tighter around his wand, glaring at Dig as though willing to strike him for another foolish remark. I, for one, won't let Miss Bones resign over this. Kingsley Shacklebolt leaned forward, eyes bright with enthusiasm. Why don't we summon the North Sea Dragon, keep it at the ready, and let it deal with Voldemort when he rises again? McGonagall drew in a sharp breath. That's far too dangerous. Severus Snape's dark eyes snapped open. He stared daggers at Kingsley. We need to focus on keeping Harry safe, he said quietly, but with such intensity that even Kingsley fell silent. Harry felt his head throb with all the competing voices. He'd hoped for a peaceful night's rest before his engagement party. Just an early turn-in, a book, maybe a cup of tea. Instead, after lunch, he'd been bundled into the Flu Network and hauled off to 12 Grimmauld Place, unsure of what new danger awaited him there. Sirius led Harry through the rippling portal, and they stepped into the crowded entrance hall of 10 Rose Road. The room buzzed with excited chatter, wizards and witches milling about, some Harry knew, others he didn't. He hardly had hoped he'd find the Weasleys here so soon, but then his eyes fell on them, gathered near the fireplace. At their center stood Charlie Weasley, the Gryffindor hero whispered about in every common room. Dark brown skin dusted with coarse freckles, a broad, genial face. He couldn't have looked more unlike the rest of his red-headed family. Harry felt a thrill of awe and a twinge of nervousness. Charlie's muscular forearms bore a gleaming burn scar, and his thick, calloused hands were dotted with blisters, evidence, Harry realized, of dragon fire and tireless work at Romania's dragon reserves. Nearby, Hagrid's booming laugh echoed off the walls. Professor McGonagall hovered with her usual stern smile. Even Professor Snape and Tom Riddle stood at opposite sides of the hall, exchanging curt nods. Harry wasn't surprised to see Professor Dumbledore. He'd expected Albus to take special interest in today's events. What did startle him was Dumbledore's first request. Harry, would you mind showing us everything you discovered in that mirror world? Harry blinked at the calm blue eyes. He'd assumed his guests were simply early for his engagement celebration, only one day in advance, nothing so pressing. Instead, Dumbledore wanted a full account of Harry's magical journey through the enchanted mirror. Harry half-turned toward the gleaming portal, then hesitated. Mrs. Weasley's arms still held him tightly, her shawl warm against his cheek, as she whispered words of encouragement. Slowly, Harry nodded. Around him, the hall fell silent in anticipation. And so it began. Harry Potter's tale of the mirror world, retold to an eager audience of friends, mentors, and rivals alike. He would recount every twist and revelation, every danger faced beyond the silver surface. But first, he drew a steadying breath, glanced at Charlie's expectant smile, and prepared to speak. Chapter 13, Be Frank. Chapter 456, Open and Honest. The living room was a lesson in minimalist unity. The stairs, floors, walls, seating, even the chandelier overhead, seemed to merge into a single seamless expanse of pale, immaculate color. All those who had gathered moments before now sat around a perfectly transparent, round crystal table. Yet the air crackled with tension. Whichever conversation they'd just had clearly gone off the rails. Mrs. Weasley, her cheeks flushed, fixed Dumbledore with a glare so fierce you'd think he'd committed an unforgivable sin. At the opposite end of the table, the mood couldn't have been more different. Tonks was keeping Ginny entertained by whimsically reshaping her nose with metamorphic magic. Each time Ginny winced, her eyes screwing shut in the same awkward grimace she'd worn in the old black family foyer, Tonks would send her nose bulging out into a hooked beak, uncannily like Snape's, then snap it back to a stubby, button-like mushroom. If that weren't enough, she'd sprout tufts of nose hair from each nostril, eliciting peals of laughter from the rest. Fred and George hovered nearby, notebooks in hand, scribbling down every twist and wiggle. It was clear they were scavenging for comedic gold in Tonks's transformations. Then, as if on cue, Tonks abruptly ceased her magical mischief. And the twins, eyes bright with ideas, shut their notebooks and waited expectantly for what would happen next. Ginny suppressed a smile at the sound of her mother's sudden roar. Albus, you can't seriously be suggesting we involve Harry and the others, Mrs. Weasley snapped, her hands clenching in her lap. They're not members of the Order of the Phoenix. Some of them have only just set foot in Hogwarts. Bill Weasley snorted, leaning back in his chair. Honestly, Mum, Ginny's still a child. I'd say we call off that engagement too. Bill Weasley! Molly Weasley sprang to her feet, skirts swirling. Ginny shot her brother a triumphant glare. Bill, you cad! Across the table, Professor Dumbledore folded his hands and regarded Mrs. Weasley with calm patience. Molly, I understand your worry, but much of what we know about Voldemort comes directly from Harry, his dreams, his own experiences. The rest we verify through careful investigation, but it all begins with him. He leaned forward, elbows on the polished wood, and looked Mrs. Weasley in the eye. To shut Harry and the others out now would mean losing our most vital intelligence. Molly's shoulders sagged slightly. But Albus, they're still children. At that, Sirius Black raised his head, voice steady and warm. Molly, as Harry's godfather, I can attest he's more than capable. We trust him with our lives. Precisely, Dumbledore agreed with a gentle nod. The Death Eaters will not pause to check ages. If we're to keep everyone safe, Harry and his friends must know exactly what they're up against. Mad-Eye Moody lifted his hip flask and took a long pull before setting it down with a clank. I'll say this once, if they're stepping into the lion's den, they're going to need every spell, every trick we've got. Training starts tomorrow. A hush fell over the room as each member of the Order absorbed the gravity of Moody's words. They were dealing not just with children, but with the best source they had of Voldemort's plans. And they all knew, ignorance wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. Potter needs protection, Snape said smoothly, but not the sort you're suggesting. He should know everything, and then stay well out of harm's way, added another voice. At that, Mrs. Weasley spun around, her cheeks blazing. Arthur, back me up here. Mr. Weasley paused, removed his glasses, and methodically cleaned the lenses on his robes. He slipped them back on, before answering, voice calm. Molly, you can't deny that. Even if we'd kept this from Harry and the others, they'd have figured it out sooner or later. Now that they already know something, it makes far more sense to give them the full story. Otherwise, they'll make decisions based on Lelith truths, and that could be far more dangerous. Molly opened her mouth to retort, but when she caught Professor McGonagall's sympathetic look, her anger faltered. Minerva, she began, then fell silent, struggling for the words. Mrs. Weasley dabbed at her eyes. Percy, always the model student. I thought he'd grown out of that, Fred muttered to George under his breath. No, Dumbledore said with a calm nod. According to my inquiries, by the time Voldemort is fully resurrected, summer vacation will already have begun. That's actually a relief, Percy said as he took his seat. He glanced at his twin brothers. I don't see any way we can lose. Now both of you, buck up and focus on your studies. Harry frowned, his curiosity piqued. Professor, he said, looking to Dumbledore, is it true that only Professor Riddle can truly kill Voldemort once he returns? I already heard one answer from Ryan, but with Voldemort's power doubled and a Pluto dragon on his side, could things have changed? It's an intriguing question, Dumbledore replied, a twinkle in his eye. Molly, it seems Harry's far more informed than we ever gave him credit for. Mrs. Weasley smiled warmly at her son, pride clear on her face. The room fell into thoughtful silence, each person weighing the gravity of what lay ahead. Molly Weasley, still unconvinced, looked Harry in the eye one more time. So you really know the secret of Voldemort's immortality? Harry met her gaze evenly. Yes, it isn't some ancient, unfathomable dark art. It's just that no one has ever dared to go that far, or been cruel enough to do it to themselves. Albus Dumbledore let out a low sigh. Harry's power might be strong enough to defeat Voldemort in combat, or even trap him in a mirror world, but to destroy him utterly, only Tom Riddle can. Harry frowned. You mean only he can kill himself after he's been resurrected? Dumbledore's eyes grew distant. Precisely. Voldemort's own arrogance has rendered him nearly invulnerable. Yes, he can be beaten, but he always finds a way to claw back to life. Molly's shoulders slumped, her doubt giving way to worry. Nearby, Sirius Black couldn't suppress a satisfied smirk. Remus Lupin, ever the peacemaker, rested a steady hand on Sirius's arm, keeping him from voicing his amusement. Sirius had long bristled at Molly's treatment of Harry, always acting as if he were her only son, and forgetting that others cared for him too. A heavy silence fell over the room. Each of them understood at last. Voldemort carried the key to his own undoing, and that terrible power lay in his own hands. Yes, Dumbledore replied quietly, his eyes steady. He turned to the gathered witches and wizards. As Professor Lupin briefed you, Gellert Grindelwald is no ordinary foe. If he chose to move now, Voldemort would stand no chance of ever returning. But, for your sake and for the future, we have agreed to strike only when our forces are at their strongest. With that, Dumbledore rose from his seat and walked to the wind-swept battlements, gazing out over the restless waters of the North Sea. Chapter 14. The Little Brat, Grindelwald. Inside Dumbledore's sprawling manor, its very architecture mocking Muggle engineering, the drawing room sat in an almost oppressive stillness. The headmaster's recent confession had left everyone reeling. A few among them already knew that the Order had deliberately allowed Voldemort's resurrection. They'd never dared speak of it aloud. The rest, Bill included, were completely in the dark. For a long moment, no one met another's gaze. Words caught in every throat, until at last a hand quivered and shot into the air. "Professor Dumbledore, who exactly is Grindelwald?" Ron asked, uncertainty in his voice. Ron's question seemed to echo everyone else's unspoken thoughts. From the way Dumbledore spoke, this Grindelwald was supposed to be more powerful, even than the headmaster himself. Harry and Ginny exchanged worried looks. Both of them had simply assumed Grindelwald was some foreign upstart. Dumbledore's eyes widened. "You don't know?" He turned, concern creasing his brow, and faced Harry. "Harry, I find that hard to believe. You heard Voldemort mention the name back in your first year. Remember? That night in the fourth-floor corridor." He hesitated, searching Harry's face for recognition. "How could you have missed it?" "Is that him?" Harry asked, staring at the chocolate frog card. "Why does that name sound so familiar?" Ron peered over his shoulder. The portrait wiggled on its own, but the wizard's face still struck Harry as oddly recognizable. "He's the one Voldemort once believed he could keep in check by giving him the Elder Wand," Harry replied. Ron tilted the card toward the light and began reading aloud. "Albus Dumbledore's most celebrated achievements, defeating the dark wizard Gellert Grindelwald in 1945, discovering 12 uses for dragon's blood, and collaborating with Nicholas Flamel on alchemical research." Ron looked up, eyebrows raised. "You're the reason I even knew who Flamel was, or that the Philosopher's Stone was real," Harry grinned. "That's because Grindelwald showed up so cunningly. The first time I got one of these cards, I nearly dropped it when the portrait started moving. And once I learned the stone existed," Ron added, "Flamel's name was all I could see. When Voldemort mentioned Flamel, I was face to face with you-know-who," Harry said softly. "I couldn't afford any distractions." He paused, then frowned. "But how do you know so much about what happened in the Chamber of Secrets?" Ron shrugged. "Why wouldn't I? It was just the two of us down there, Voldemort and me." Harry's eyes narrowed, and Dumbledore didn't show up until much later. A flicker of realization crossed his face. In that moment, he recognized a glaring blind spot in everything he thought he knew. Professor McGonagall and Severus Snape, both present, seemed to know every detail. When Dumbledore insisted he couldn't have been unaware of Grindelwald's schemes, Harry realized that only those two possessed the full story. It wasn't a baseless intuition. His eye for reading faces, sharpened even further after merging with his alternate self, made it unmistakable. And most tellingly, neither McGonagall nor Snape showed the slightest urge to conceal what they knew. Even Dumbledore had gone uncharacteristically stiff and embarrassed when caught eavesdropping, and McGonagall had flushed. But Snape's expression remained as unreadable as ever. Dumbledore reached up and absently touched his broken nose. "Harry, do you recall the Philosopher's Stone left behind by the wizard from the moon?" Harry tamped down any flicker of surprise. "Yes," he said, his voice deliberately clipped. "He took the real stone away with him." He forced a neutral expression, unwilling to betray how much he'd learned about lunar secrets in Moon City, or how certain he'd become that this so-called moon wizard truly hailed from there. Albus Dumbledore leaned forward, his eyes alight with excitement. "The fake Philosopher's Stone recorded every moment of your confrontation and battle with Voldemort." Professor Dye tapped his wooden leg, eyebrows raised. "Recorded? As in, it's some sort of magical camera?" Dumbledore nodded. "Precisely. It's an artifact that captures the ambient magical energies around it, then replays them. The method it uses is highly unusual and utterly unique. Mad-Eye Moody's eyes bulged. Did you say wizards from the moon? Mr. Weasley practically vaulted out of his chair. The moon? That has to be code for something, right? Are we dealing with, what, an undercover group all this time? Hestia's jaw dropped. How could we have missed this during the whole dissolution of the Order of the Phoenix? DJ shot to his feet. Everybody, calm down. Moon Wizards isn't a code name. Dumbledore held up a hand. Based on the inquiries I and the 4 deans conducted in my office, we seriously believe these witches and wizards may actually hail from the moon. He paused, meeting each face in the room. Of course, it's still conjecture, nothing confirmed. A hum of disbelief rippled through the gathered witches and wizards. But how could any magical society be more advanced than ours? Someone whispered. At that moment, Kingsley Shacklebolt, usually our most composed voice, shifted restlessly. We are the strongest, he declared, his calm veneer cracking with uncharacteristic fervor. In his mind, Britain's wizarding community stood unrivaled, on Earth at least. The idea that true magical sophistication might exist elsewhere struck him like a thunderbolt. Questions swirled in every mind. Were lunar wizards fact or fancy? And if they were real, what would their existence mean for the delicate balance of power in the wizarding world, and for the future of magic itself? He was prepared to sacrifice everything for the safety of Britain's wizarding community. Even after his expulsion, he'd wasted no time in joining the Order of the Phoenix. It's your intuition talking, Mad-Eye Moody said, taking another long sip from his battered kettle. Of all the wizards gathered there, apart from Tom Riddle himself, Moody fancied he was the most formidable. Over the years, his sharp instincts had saved countless lives. That fellow who fancies himself a magician is like the moon's reflection on water, utterly untouchable. He drained his cup, then wiped his mouth with the back of a hand. Truth be told, even my so-called proud intuition is about as useful against him as a pair of reading glasses. He glanced at the Smith family, renowned for their work uncovering the hidden magic of the moon, who gave an approving nod. All I can say for certain is that his power is linked to the moon. Are there wizards living up there? I'd stake my life on it. Even if he could confirm their existence with nothing but a twitch of foresight, that knowledge was still far beyond his reach. Chapter 7. The Silence of the Moon. Albus Dumbledore sat alone in his dimly lit study, the single crescent moonbeam filtering through the tall, arched window and pooling across his desk. Before him lay a small model of the Earth and its satellite, an intricate glass globe that whispered of mysteries he dare not ponder. For some inexplicable reason, he found himself unable to regard the moon as others did, those brash bricoleurs who boasted of setting foot upon its silver surface. I simply can't think of it the way they do, he confessed, his voice barely louder than the rustle of parchment. It's as though some force has sealed off that part of my mind. He shivered, recalling a familiar knot of dread tightening in his chest. This was the second time he had felt so utterly bereft of power. The first had come when he and Gellert Grindelwald had parted ways, an event that still haunted the corridors of his memories. I must have wondered about it when I was a child, Dumbledore admitted, gazing at the globe. After all, countless wizarding tales abound with lunar lore, mysterious tides, cursed werewolves, guardians of ancient magic. But as I matured, even as I climbed to my present station, the thought simply never returned. Never! Easley echoed, stepping into the room. He'd been summoned to discuss the latest intelligence from the Ministry, but his eyes were locked on Dumbledore's expression, equal parts curiosity and concern. The headmaster looked up, meeting Ron's gaze. Yes, never. It's as if my subconscious refuses to acknowledge it. I can't explain why, but the moment I sense that familiar pull— He paused, choosing his words carefully. I push it away, as though it were a dangerous enchantment. Ron frowned. But the moon is just a rock in the sky, sir. Dumbledore offered a sad smile. Something as commonplace as the moon has eluded my mind's eye all these years, and now, standing here with its light upon me, I realize just how little I truly understand of the forces at play. The silence that followed was thick with unsaid fears. Ron, normally quick with a joke, could only nod. He sensed that Dumbledore's barrier was not one of whimsy, but of profound necessity, and perhaps deep regret. With a sigh, the headmaster rose from his chair and moved to the window. The moonlight brushed his silver beard, lending him an ethereal sheen. "Come, Ron, I'll need your help to unravel this," he said softly. "For if I am to face what lies hidden beyond that pale glow, I cannot do it alone." Ron hurried to his side, determined to pierce the shadow that shrouded the wizard who had taught him so much. And under the watchful glow of the moon, a new chapter in their journey began. Dumbledore leaned back in his armchair, lifted off his half-moon spectacles, and began to speak in a measured tone. "I used every connection I have to investigate this mysterious magician," he said, wiping the lenses with a soft cloth. "Yet I turned up nothing definitive about him. What I did discover, however, was a strange pattern in the United States. Several Muggle farms have reported selling barely a tenth of their harvest each year. The rest of the crops are being inexplicably buried, discarded, or simply vanishing without a trace." Harry, Ginny, and Ron exchanged startled glances. Dumbledore continued, "When my friends in America realized what was going on, they stopped writing to me. Don't worry, they're all safe and alive. One of them even flew here to speak with me face to face. He assured me that everyone is well, and my instincts confirm his report." He replaced his spectacles and offered them a reassuring smile. "The trail leads straight to that farm, and it lies in the United States. That is where we must go next." The three young wizards looked at one another, determination shining in their eyes. The path was clear. Their journey would take them across the Atlantic in search of answers. Chapter 15. The Slow Giant. Mr. Weasley leaned forward in his chair, eyes shining. "I knew it. Aside from the United States, only Russia has ever landed on the moon." He practically vibrated with excitement. No surprise to anyone who knew his passion for all things Muggle. Before anyone could respond, Ron cleared his throat. "Actually, Dad, the Soviet Union never landed people on the moon. They sent an unmanned probe that brought back about 300 grams of lunar rock." Ron's tone was a bit too eager. He'd studied every detail meticulously. After all, he needed to sound flawless when he spun his tale about visiting Moon City. Being in Ravenclaw meant keeping one's facts straight, and he intended to cover his tracks perfectly. Mrs. Weasley set her knitting aside, her needles clicking to a halt. Tears glimmered in her eyes as she reached out and squeezed Ron's hand. "I always thought your sorting into Ravenclaw was just an accident," she admitted softly. "I believe the Sorting Hat took pity on you because of Harry's friendship, and that any clever spell you invented was really Harry's doing." Ron swallowed. He met his mother's gaze, searching for a way to explain the truth without shattering her faith in him, or revealing the little white lies he'd built so carefully around his newfound reputation. Ron couldn't hide his pride after breezing through every question on the quiz. He beamed at his mother, who was lounging by the hearth. "See, Mom, that proves I'm a true Ravenclaw." Before she could reply, a flicker in the fireplace caught everyone's eye, a newsflash scrolling across the enchanted flames. "Look," she said, "the Americans have landed on the moon." Ron's grin faltered. "They must have cheated with Muggle technology," he snapped. "There's no other explanation." Kingsley slammed his fist on the table, still smarting from being outdone by wizards from other countries. "Cheating indeed. If our Muggle government had half their power, we'd already be living on the moon ourselves." Laughter bubbled around the room. Sirius leaned back in his chair, swirling his teacup. "With Harry Potter and Professor Dumbledore on our side, failure isn't an option." Moody set down his kettle, lifted his goblet of gin, and drained it in one smooth gulp. "Even if we can't do it ourselves," he said, wiping his mouth, "at least the Americans can. And your nickname? Spot on." Nymphadora Tonks let her metamorph magus gift do the talking, her chin elongated into a perfect Draco-esque point. Arching an amused eyebrow, she asked, "Weren't we just discussing Grindelwald a moment ago?" "In our day, his reputation was on par with Voldemort's today," Moody said, his magical eye flickering as he spoke. Harry frowned. "But he didn't tear down the wizarding world, he modernized it." Moody, who rarely indulged nostalgia, offered a faint nod, the old wariness in his expression giving way to something almost like pride. "Innovation instead of ruin." "Revolutionizing," Harry pressed. "Precisely," Moody replied, his grizzled face softening. Isn't progress better than destruction? Ron held up a chocolate frog card, squinting at the faded print. If that's true, why do they still call him a dark wizard? And why isn't he ever named a dark lord? A low snort came from Sirius, lounging on the edge of the table, all Fudge's handiwork. When he ascended to the minister's office, he quietly rewrote history, smearing anyone who outshone Dumbledore without leaving a paper trail. Harry glanced between his godfather and the ex-Auror. So at least they had some shame? Sirius shrugged. They claim they did, but let's be honest, politicians wear shame like a badge, not a blanket. Moody's one visible eye gleamed knowingly. In the end, you judge a wizard by his deeds, not by what a ministry pamphlet says. The tent fell silent, as each of them absorbed the truth. History may be written by those in power, but it is remembered by those who dare to reshape it. At that time, all of Europe was caught up in Grindelwald's fanatic all-crusade. His ideas, wizarding supremacy over Muggles, resonated with many conservative pureblood families who fled the continent for Britain as their last hope. Every Ministry of Magic on the continent and every influential pureblood household sent a delegation to Hogwarts, imploring Albus Dumbledore, the Transfiguration Professor, to stand against Grindelwald. They knew he was the only one who could stop him. And just as the ministers had predicted, Dumbledore did. In a duel that went down in wizarding legend, he overpowered Grindelwald and left him no choice but to lock himself away in Nurmengard, the very prison he had built for his political opponents. Afterward, the British Ministry of Magic urged Dumbledore to accept the post of Minister for Magic. They boasted that, by having him in charge, they would have effectively harnessed his power for their own prestige. But Dumbledore refused. He looked down on the whole idea. Hagrid grumbled from beside the fireplace. Sirius Black gave a cold smile. Hagrid's right, and that's why Dumbledore's greatest victory barely gets a mention in official records. If you glance at the front of a chocolate frog card, his duel with Grindelwald, his most extraordinary feat, gets barely a line. The standard school curriculum, the modern history of magic, glosses over it too. He shook his head. The ministry simply can't bear to let anyone outside their ranks claim such honors they ought to have earned themselves. Chapter 7. Shadows of a Dark Vision. A low cough cut through the quiet of Professor Dumbledore's office. Mr. Weasley cleared his throat and glanced at the stern faces around the table. The Ministry of Magic isn't like that anymore, he began, adjusting his robes. Under Millicent Bagnall's tenure, they wouldn't have tolerated half these rumors. Professor McGonagall shot Dig a scolding look. Dig shifted in his seat, cheeks reddening. Turning her attention back to Dumbledore, she leaned forward. Albus, you've just returned from Auror headquarters. Tell us plainly, what is Grindelwald's philosophy? Harry, ever curious, couldn't keep silent. Professor, what does Grindelwald actually believe? He remembered Moody's warnings. Grindelwald was powerful, yes, but it was his ideology that chilled Harry to the bone. Dumbledore's expression grew grave. He is convinced that Muggles are advancing too quickly in the world. His remedy? First, wizards must unite. Then, conquer the Muggle population, McGonagall supplied, her voice tight. Dumbledore nodded. Precisely, and what's most terrifying is how dangerously plausible his plan is. Muggle minds, unfortunately, are all too susceptible to subtle magical influence. A hush fell over the room. Harry swallowed. Is it similar to Voldemort's outlook? Ron snorted, leaning back. Only to the extent that both place wizards above Muggles. But that's where the resemblance ends, Harry said, frowning. Voldemort never cared about Muggles at all. He simply wanted to rule over everyone, magical or not. Dumbledore sighed. Voldemort's hatred was narrow. He believed in pure blood supremacy and dismissed Muggles with contempt. Grindelwald's ambitions, by contrast, reach far beyond bloodlines. He seeks total domination of both worlds. McGonagall's eyes flashed. He doesn't just disdain non-magical folk. He aims to subjugate them entirely. Harry felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Dumbledore's final words echoed in his ears. Yes, Harry, Grindelwald doesn't merely look down on Muggles, he despises them. And that is a darkness we must be ready to confront. His companion leaned forward, eyes alight with grim fascination. Grindelwald never questioned it. He knew Muggles could be just as powerful as we are. He tapped the table for emphasis. He treated them as equals. an opponent not to be underestimated. Riddle, who had remained silent until now, couldn't help but speak. He'd grown accustomed to dissecting both Voldemort's and his own methods, as if they were two separate chess games. Yes, he agreed, his voice low. Ow. Grindelwald's brilliance lay in revealing to wizards just how dangerous muggles could become. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But his plan rested on an assumption, one no strategist should ever make. If every witch and wizard united behind a single coordinated campaign, we could easily subjugate muggles with magic. His companion's lips curled in a sardonic smile. Yet all it takes is one wizard who sounds the alarm. Riddle nodded slowly. Exactly. The moment muggles recognize they possess destructive forces far surpassing our charms and curses, the wizarding world would be plunged into catastrophe. He shrugged, as though conceding an inconvenient truth. Talented wizards like us might survive on skill alone, but society as we know it would collapse. We'd fracture into isolated bands, entirely reminiscent of the Middle Ages, scattered and vulnerable. Silence fell between them, heavy with the weight of that grim prospect. Dumbledore leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers as he addressed the room. From a giant's perspective, muggles are a curious menace, mere mortals armed with devices featuring intricate triggers. When they pull those triggers together in unison, those weapons can fell a giant. Even a single shot can wound one, though no lone bullet carries enough force to bring him down outright. Some of these muggles, tall and sturdily built, seem almost as fearless as giants themselves, never flinching at the sight of one. Others rely on speed, darting in and out of reach, though they tremble at the risk of failure. A few have even turned a profit off the creature's byproducts, giant hair for instance, so they have every reason to keep the beasts alive. But giants move with ponderous slowness. Unless they are actually struck, unless those bullets find their mark, they scarcely register the flick of a gun. In most confrontations, a single shot merely irritates them. It is only when weapons fire in perfect concert that a giant ever truly falls. He paused, letting his words settle. Then, with a faint, knowing smile, Dumbledore added, "That is why muggles, small as they are, remain a perilous force to be reckoned with." Chapter 16, Perpetual Motion Machine, Pauper's Edition. Deep in the silent recesses of Smith Castle's basement, Ryan sat alone before a flickering hollow projection. As a time traveler, he was irresistibly drawn to every private moment of these legendary figures, old friends he'd only just met. Penelope, however, showed little curiosity, and Kate, the castle's resident gossip, shrugged off any further intrigue. Neither of them cared to linger once Harry had summoned the Pluto dragon. Within minutes, both girls had slipped away to the study, eager to lose themselves in dusty tomes. Left in shadow and silence, Ryan leaned back against the cold stone wall. He watched Peter Pettigrew's resourcefulness play out before him, marveling at how indispensable the timid wizard had become in past battles. But even Pettigrew's talents paled beside the hidden enchantments woven into the very fabric of Smith Castle. As a member of its magical household, Ryan had long taken those protections for granted, imagining the fortress unbreachable. Yet he knew all too well that no matter how formidable the wards, a single, well-executed transfiguration spell could shatter the sturdiest defense. As the recording ended, Ryan sighed. In the world of magic, true security was a myth, and he, of all people, understood better than anyone how fleeting power could be. But if a house is suffused with magic, especially universal wards that repel all conventional spells, then so long as its structure remains intact, it stands as an impenetrable fortress to any wizard. With that in mind, Ryan shut off the projection and climbed out of the basement. Inside the box, the human fragment of Peter Pettigrew's soul still thrashed in turmoil. By the Lord God's decree, Pettigrew had painstakingly imbued every brick and beam of the castle with protective enchantments, reinforcing Smith Castle's defenses with layers of magic. Had this been the true Smith Castle, Pettigrew's feeble handiwork wouldn't have been needed. The original fortress had been tended for generations, every stone and yard of earth steeped in hidden power. This outside world replica, however, lacked that ancestral strength. Yet Ryan knew that with only a modest drain on his own lesser magic, he could elevate the hastily built shell to mirror the genuine castle's might, while the real Smith Castle remained safely untouched. Ryan's power was astonishing. No matter how many times 1,000 nuclear bombs reduced Smith Castle to rubble, he could restore it perfectly. Yet he understood something few do. Moving from frugality to luxury is easy, but relinquishing luxury for frugidity is nearly impossible. Now, accustomed to his spacious villa, the once grand apartments he'd lived in seemed cramped and mundane. Part of him longed to perform the ultimate family rite, enchanting every inch of the castle in a single breath, the culmination of millennia of Smith tradition. After all, the exterior Smith Castle he'd erected in the mortal realm was identical in every detail to its hidden counterpart in another dimension. But Ryan's keen senses detected the truth. The surface castle was nothing more than a flawless illusion, crackling with magic yet hollow inside, as vulnerable as walking naked down a crowded street. In the end, he let the idea go. Although investing the full ritual would mark 1 second in the outside world, it would trap him in an eternity of arcane labor spelled out through countless realms. And then, in the quiet aftermath, he noticed something he'd overlooked for far too long: Peter Pettigrew's wizard soul. Stored deep within the real Smith Castle, it pulsed with latent power, an unexpected key to the very core of the Lord God's domain. The soul of Peter Pettigrew now functions as the very heart of this new castle in the outside world, allowing it to manifest magical energy as long as a wizard's power flows uninterrupted. Because Pettigrew's physical form, the rat known as Scabbers, remains alive, his spirit doesn't suffer the same depletion as an ordinary ghost. Typical specters spend their magical serves merely sustaining their incorporeal existence, sacrificing most of their senses just to linger in a projection-like state. But here, if Pettigrew's soul ever runs too low from channeling too much power, the living body of Scabbers and the castle's innate magical field work together to restore him. It's the same principle behind Voldemort's Horcruxes. Voldemort sought immortal life. Pettigrew merely seeks endless magical regeneration. In effect, it's a makeshift perpetual motion machine. Bind a wizard's soul to a living host, and you never run out of magic. On the second floor of the castle, in a quiet corner of the restaurant, Ryan lifted a steaming cup of black tea to his lips. He leaned back, exhaling slowly, marveling at, and quietly admiring, the brilliance of his invention. Peter Pettigrew was fated to spend eternity as a mouse, trapped in a tiny, scrabbling body he could never escape. He'd long since accepted that this was his penance, his endless, squeaking purgatory. But then Ryan stepped in, offering him something far stranger than freedom, a chance to become a living perpetual motion machine. Of course, the charm wasn't true perpetual motion. It was just clever enchantment funneled through a miniature clockwork heart. Peter, now nicknamed Banban, would trundle about forever, a tiny marvel of magic and gears. And yet, as inevitably as rust creeps over metal, the mechanism eventually wore down. When Banban finally collapsed, gears stripped and spring unwound, the magic dissolved, and the machine went silent. All of which was happening in the far corner of Ryan's cluttered study when Kate slipped through the door. She darted behind him, eager to catch every word he'd just read aloud. "Ryan, what did Harry say next?" she whispered, practically bouncing on the balls of her feet. Kate loved books, but she couldn't sit still the way Penelope could. Penelope, who would hold a single page in place while reading it aloud for an entire hour. Kate preferred pacing, wand in hand, ready to punctuate her thoughts with sparks of light. In Penelope's company, however, she knew she'd have to behave, so she stored up all her fidgets until the moment she could dash away. Ryan closed the leather-bound volume with a soft snap. He turned, arms spread wide in mock invitation. "Humph! Why don't you call me Little Brat for a change?" Before he finished, a soft flutter of wings sounded from the rafters. A swirl of crimson light winked Kate away from behind him, and then she reappeared at his feet, cradled in a basket of rose-colored magic. She crawled up his legs and curled against his chest like a cat, rubbing her nose against his chin in the most unreasonable show of affection. "So," she murmured, voice muffled, "what did they say after that?" Ryan sighed, one corner of his mouth twitching into a reluctant smile. "They only talked about old Grindelwald," he confessed. "That's it, nothing more." He stroked Kate's hair, soft as a breeze. Somewhere in the dusty shadows of the study, the broken remnants of Banban's heart gears lay silent, their promise of eternity quietly undone. Ron leapt to his feet, yelling the moment Grindelwald's image flickered back into view. Around him, Harry and the others exchanged worried glances, voices rising in a chorus of questions. Is he all right? How did he escape? Where is he now? Dumbledore raised a calm hand, silencing them. His serene gaze swept across the room as he explained that even though Grindelwald had broken free, the situation was under control, and more surprisingly, that Grindelwald had agreed to join their side. Whispers rippled through the assembled witches and wizards. Later, in a quieter corner of the courtyard, Ryan and Kate stood apart from the crowd. Ryan gently brushed a lock of hair behind Kate's ear, then closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, as if bracing himself for what came next. Now that Voldemort might return, Kate began hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper, will you do something after he's resurrected? As a Hogwarts student who'd grown up in England, Kate knew only too well how wars tore through lives and homes. If Ryan's power matched Voldemort's, she worried not only for the wider conflict, but for him personally. Ryan opened his eyes, their gray depths steady and sure. No, he said after a moment, surprising even himself with the simplicity of the answer, but there will be no casualties. Kate's brow furrowed. No casualties? He nodded. I control Durmstrang. I can end this without anyone getting hurt. She studied him, a mix of relief and new questions in her gaze. But for now, Kate simply let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, and allowed herself to hope. Ryan looked at Kate and said, I promise. As days passed, his conviction only grew. He would beat the God of Death. At least that was true if the God of Death still possessed any will of his own, if his personality hadn't already been wiped clean, as Ryan suspected. Once Ryan fully embedded and then destroyed the prophecy that the God of Death obsessed over, the deity would have no choice but to take notice. And truth be told, Ryan wasn't eager to face him quite so soon. Even more strangely, if the god's mind had truly been reduced to cold machinery, then the sprawling afterlife that blanketed the world would effectively become Ryan's to control. Souls of all kinds, countless generations of Smiths, even Ryan's own biological parents, would flow back through his realm. The thought should have filled him with triumph, but instead a warm flush crept up his neck. He imagined standing before those familiar faces, grandparents he'd never met, ancestors he'd only read about, his parents who'd been gone so long, and he felt a sudden, unaccountable shyness. He wasn't sure how to greet them or what he would say. Chapter 17. Engagement Ceremony. Harry stepped into the great hall of Weasley Manor and froze. He'd never seen so many red-haired people in one place, and he certainly hadn't realized how elaborate an engagement party could be. Everywhere he looked, aunts fussed over their best dresses, uncles swapped stories beside roaring hearths, and cousins jostled for a glimpse of the soon-to-be bride. Don't look at me, Ron muttered, adjusting his purple waistcoat and stealthily nibbling a mince pie. I haven't a clue who half these people are. Harry gave him a sympathetic glance. I had no idea an engagement involved this much. Annoying hospitality. Ron sighed. It's not personal. You know Ginny was the first girl born to the Weasley line in generations. When she arrived, relatives from every corner of the globe sent letters, cakes, even entire trunks of gifts. Our family's only real asset is our numbers. Harry surveyed the throng. Scores of aunts balancing teacups, uncles comparing Ilops Owl Emporium sales, and a small army of squealing cousins. He felt like an interloper at a family reunion the size of Hogsmeade. As your best man, Ron continued, I was told to arrive hours early. I'm supposed to memorize every toast and oversee the cake-cutting ceremony. He offered Harry a sympathetic look, butter-flecked whiskers twitching. Sorry, mate. Before Harry could reply, Sirius Black appeared at his side, looking dapper in charcoal gray. He clapped Harry on the shoulder, then nonchalantly flicked his wand at his own forehead. Suddenly, a sharp, cooling breeze swept around Sirius, raising goosebumps on his sweat-damp hair. Keep your charms under control, Black, Harry muttered. Sirius smirked and dispelled the chill. Just trying to stay cool for the ceremony, he said, grinning conspiratorially. Molly Weasley's voice rang out above the chatter. Harry, dear Ginny, if you two would step forward, please. Harry caught Ginny's hand as they moved to the front of the room. She looked radiant in a pale yellow dress, her freckles glowing in the lantern light. Mrs. Weasley cleared her throat once more. As is tradition, she announced, the bride and groom must cut the first slice of cake together, over their heads. Everyone ready? A chorus of "Ready" answered from the assembled guests. Harry exchanged a nervous grin with Ginny. She shrugged playfully and squeezed his hand. They approached the towering three-tier cake, iced in white and swirled with ruby-red ribbons. Harry lifted the gleaming silver knife, and with a smooth motion, sliced off a perfect wedge. The slice fell through the air and landed neatly on the tray held by Fred and George. Thunderous applause rose around them. Harry shook out his unruly black hair, sending a few crumbs fluttering to the floor. "Why does everything in this family have to involve throwing pastries at our heads?" he whispered. Ginny laughed, brushing a stray crumb from his collar. "It's a Weasley thing," she teased. "Come on, Mum's going to be cross if we don't move on to the next tradition." Ron sidled up, a cheeky grin plastered beneath his freckles. "Welcome to the family, Harry," he said, offering a greasy-fingered handshake. Harry looked at Ginny, then around at the sea of familiar, if slightly overwhelming faces. He took Ron's hand, then reached for Ginny's. "Here's to us," he said softly. The clatter of teacups, the rising laughter, and the warmth of a true home filled the hall. Despite the chaos, Harry realized he wouldn't have wanted it any other way. Sirius's voice dropped to a low, commanding tone, and in an instant, Kreacher appeared at their side. Harry blinked. If he hadn't heard that summons, he would never have recognized this sprightly, impeccably groomed elf, his normally wispy white ear tufts and haughty scowl entirely gone. Before Harry could even let out a relieved sigh, Sirius seized the leather-bound guidebook from his hands and flipped it open. "You assured me that both the portraits of my ancestors and the Weasleys themselves confirmed you're fully versed in every detail of this event," Sirius said, pointing to the 10th section under Engagement Banquet Protocols. "Remember, our guest of honor is Harry Potter, godson of a famously defiant son, heir to one of the oldest pure-blood lines, and hero who rescued the great Regulus Black. I expect nothing less than perfect tradition and utmost decorum." Kreacher bowed deeply, his large dark eyes unwavering. "Sir, the proper customs for an engagement banquet follow the groom's lineage. In the case of the Potters, their earliest estate lay in Gloucestershire, England." Sirius raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "With respect," Kreacher continued, "respected wizarding families of Gloucestershire have for generations observed a singular ritual. They suspend an elaborate, multi-tiered cake high above the heads of the betrothed and ceremoniously slice it from below." He held Sirius's gaze unflinchingly, leaving no doubt that he would uphold the tradition to the letter. "Back in my day," James muttered, "when I got married, there weren't half as many rules to follow." Sirius rolled his eyes. "Tradition, schmrdition." If Harry doesn't like it, Harry held up a hand to stop him. No, I'm not opposed. I'm just curious. What's the story behind all this cake business?" He glanced at Kreacher, who had been lurking in the corner by the table. "Kreacher, could you enlighten us?" The house elf bowed deeply. "Master Potter, the cake's original form was a simple flatbread meant to symbolize happiness and joy. When the bride and groom place a slice on each other's head, it's supposed to guarantee a cheerful, prosperous marriage. And cutting the cake? That's like the branches of a tree spreading out. More slices, more children." At Harry's raised eyebrow, Kreacher ducked his head even lower, as though Harry himself held unquestioned authority. "Children?" Harry's face flushed. "In that case, let's cut a few extra pieces." Sirius laughed and threw an arm around him. "Be careful what you wish for. Remember, Ginny Weasley's in the picture now. If the Weasleys hadn't gone almost a century without a daughter, they'd have known about this tradition long ago. If the Weasleys had ever borne daughters, rival pureblood families hungry for heirs might have overlooked their so-called traitors. Instead, the Weasleys, despised by the noblest lineages, were envied most of all for the size of their brood. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, a vast white marquee stood on the manor's front lawn. A deep blue carpet led into its entrance, flanked by neat rows of gilded chairs. White and gold blossoms curled around each supporting pillar, and above the center aisle, Fred and George had tied a cluster of shimmering golden balloons to mark the spot where Harry and Ginny would be formally betrothed. Outside the tent, leaf-green butterflies, their wings patterned like polished jasper, floated lazily over the hedges. Every now and then, hidden fountains inside released gentle plumes of mist, lending the scene an otherworldly fairy tale glow. Inside the marquee, Harry paced near the back of the carpet, fingers twisting nervously at his robes as he waited for the engagement ceremony to begin. Nearby, Ron, Draco, and Sirius, standing in as Harry's honorary family, held a large seating chart and greeted each arriving guest. With polite smiles and discreet nods, they guided friends and dignitaries alike to their assigned seats beneath the tent's soft, golden light. After an indeterminate interval, the tent brimmed with guests. On a raised platform at its center stood Sirius, the evening's master of ceremonies, his hair neatly cropped and his robes aglow with gold embroidery. Below him, flanking a royal blue carpet, sat Professor Dumbledore and his closest companions. Beyond them, a vibrant sea of red, Weasleys from branches around the globe, filled every available bench. The tent's warmth was almost palpable, and a current of nervous excitement ran through the crowd. Conversations hummed and laughter broke out in delighted bursts. The most striking sight belonged to Hagrid, who occupied a custom-made throne of burnished gold so vast that his next-door neighbor, the slender Draco Malfoy, seemed almost swallowed by its armrests. In stark contrast, Professor Snape sat rigid as a statue, his expression severe and unyielding, dark eyes fixed unblinkingly ahead. Next to Lupin, Tonks fidgeted with barely contained energy. Far from subdued, she was encircled by giggling Weasley children, each of whom cheered when she puckered her face into a bizarre grin or pursed her lips in comic disapproval. Meanwhile, Mrs. Weasley flitted through the crowd like a benevolent whirlwind, pausing frequently to offer warm hugs and heartfelt greetings. Bill and Charlie had deliberately refrained from sitting with the rest of the Weasley clan. Instead, they'd taken seats just behind Hagrid, leaning forward to whisper to him, and every so often, even to Draco. Harry knew Charlie was almost certainly chattering about dragons, but Bill? Harry couldn't imagine what his oldest brother had to say. Meanwhile, Percy stood guard in front of Fred and George, his posture rigid, his expression stern, blocking their latest pitch destined for their fellow relatives. Harry and Ron waited at the tent's entrance, both clad in their finest dress robes, each with a large white rose pinned to his lapel. The canopy inside was eerily empty, and Harry's heart hammered in his chest. He kept telling himself that in just a moment, the person he would be with for the rest of his life would step through that opening. Time stretched on until at last a cool breeze stirred the tent flap. Pale blue petals, each one frosty to the touch, swirled in on the wind. Just then, soft music drifted through the air, a delicate, enchanting melody. And with the petals dancing around her, Ginny appeared at the edge of the carpet. She slipped her hand into Mr. Weasley's right hand, and the two of them sailed forward together along the ribbon of light blue fabric. A heartfelt sigh rose up from the assembled witches and wizards as they watched Ginny join Harry. In that moment, every nervous flutter in his chest dissolved into something warm and certain. Chapter 18. Wedding. Harry hadn't seen Ginny in more than a day, and now that she appeared before him, he scarcely registered anything else. Even Mr. Weasley, freshly dressed in a much flashier outfit and sporting neatly tamed hair instead of his usual wind-blown look, barely registered in Harry's awareness. All he could see was Ginny. She stepped into the bright white tent in a simple, golden gown that seemed to glow against the fabric walls. Her fiery red hair was swept up into an elegant chignon, secured by a silver tiara set with yellow gemstones. The soft light caught her sharp jawline, and Harry felt the world around him fade away. Beside him, Ron was equally entranced. A subtle breeze carried the scent of unfamiliar blossoms inside the tent. Petals drifted lightly in on a cool draft, lending the moment an almost magical quality. As the last notes of music lingered in the air, Ginny took her place at the front, her calm smile sending a thrill through Harry's chest. "Ladies and gentlemen," came Sirius Black's smooth voice from the raised dais, pulling Harry back to the present. Warm laughter and applause rippled through the assembled guests. Harry finally noticed Mr. Weasley looking down at him with shining eyes, pride and joy written plainly on his face. Sirius lifted his hand, calling for attention. "Today we gather to celebrate the coming together of two courageous, loyal souls," he announced, voice echoing under the tent's peaked roof. In Merlin's name, let us begin." Ginny turned her head and smiled at Harry, giving him a quick wink before she faced forward again. Instinctively, Harry's thoughts slipped away from the crowded tent and back to those rare afternoons they'd spent alone in one of the castle's empty classrooms, times that already felt like a distant dream. Every moment had been too perfect to last, especially with Ron always hovering nearby. That's why those precious, stolen hours had seemed so fleeting. Even now, he could still hear Sirius's voice booming from the stage, calling their names. Instead of joy, a flash of anger ran through him. He'd only just confronted his darker self, barely escaped its pull, and part of him quivered to draw his wand and unleash a barrage of curses on Ron, who stood just a step away. "Harry James Potter, do you take Ginevra Molly Weasley?" The question cut through Harry's reverie like a spell. He looked down at Ginny's hand in his, felt the warmth of her grip. Around them, every pair of eyes was fixed on the two of them, expectant and bright. Pushing away the storm of thoughts in his head, Harry steadied his voice. "I do." At once, a chorus of cheers and tears rippled through the crowd. A series of triumphant blasts, Hagrid's unmistakable fanfare, echoed overhead. Harry closed his eyes for a moment, letting the noise wash over him, and smiled. Sirius produced a handkerchief the size of a tablecloth, truly fitting for his dramatic flair, and dabbed at his eyes. "I hereby declare your engagement over," he proclaimed, voice rich with mock solemnity. "May your futures be joyful and bright." With that, he swept his wand high into the air. In an instant, the brilliant white canopy above them shifted to a night sky studded with pinpricks of light. Soft motes of starlight drifted down around the couple, who stood locked in a tight embrace. Then came a crackling burst like distant fireworks, and a star-flecked cake, 10 tiers of it, materialized, hovering above their heads. Mr. Weasley stepped forward to join Sirius. Together they ran their wands along the cake's glossy surface, and with a single motion it split apart. Each slice transformed into a tiny, blazing meteor that arcs toward the audience, landing gently on broad, glossy vine leaves that sprouted at each guest's place. Fred and George launched into thunderous applause. Golden balloons overhead burst in unison, releasing birds of paradise and delicate golden bells that drifted dreamily through the air. Finally, a flutter of gold flakes descended onto the vines, where, as if by magic, they solidified into polished timed mistletoe, knives and forks, ready for everyone to enjoy the feast that lay ahead. Sirius and Mr. Weasley called out in unison, "Ladies and gentlemen, please help yourselves." At their signal, the sound of tinkling bells and birdsong mingled with excited chatter as the guests flocked to the cake table. Harry felt a small flutter of pleasure, not at the engagement itself, but at spotting Ron standing off to the side like an usher, simply watching everyone else indulge. He remembered Creature's explanation of Gloucestershire engagement customs. Only the guests were permitted to eat the cake, because each bite represented a blessing bestowed upon the couple. The fiancés themselves, the best man, the maid of honor, and even those tasked with slicing the cake, traditionally one close relative from each family, weren't allowed a single taste. Harry squeezed Ginny's hand and stared at the stage. In an ordinary wedding, the formalities would have wrapped up by now, but this ceremony in Gloucestershire reserved its cake-cutting for last. Only once every guest had finished their slice would the official portion end, and the festivities move into a more relaxed phase. Intently, Harry tuned in to the soft clink of forks against porcelain, the low hum of appreciative murmurs, and the rustle of napkins, waiting for the moment when he, too, could join the feast. Harry barely noticed Hagrid finishing his cake first. The slice had been astonishingly small, and despite Hagrid's best efforts to savor each bite, it vanished in mere moments. As he set down the fork and knife, the enchanted vines that bound them dissolved into a gentle breeze, and the silverware itself shimmered back into golden dust. "Sirs and ladies, please rise." Sirius Black and Mr. Weasley called out in unison. Everyone stood, still pleasantly full. With a synchronized wave of their wands, Sirius and Mr. Weasley sent the chairs floating upward, and the great tent's canvas walls seemed to vanish into thin air. In their place stood the familiar silhouette of the Burrow, its warm, crooked manor house, the trickling fountain out front, and the glass-paneled conservatory gleaming in the daylight. From the tent's former heart, molten gold spread smoothly across the lawn, solidifying into a luminous dance floor. The enchanted chairs drifted back toward the round tables, each covered in crisp white cloth, and settled gracefully onto the grass around the golden platform. Then, from the house's wide porch, a band in gleaming gold tailcoats strode forward and took their places on a raised stage. "Amazing," Ron murmured, eyes bright with wonder. Waiters appeared from every corner of the hall, balancing gleaming trays of pumpkin juice, butterbeer, and fire whiskey, while others carried stacks of steaming pies and sandwiches. The moment Ron spotted the closest table, already piled high with food, he bolted across the room, practically tripping over his own feet in his haste. Harry stood back, half amused, half envious. Ron was in his element, surrounded by cousins, aunts, and uncles who greeted him with warm smiles and hearty handshakes. Harry and Ginny, by contrast, had been swept up in a current of unfamiliar faces. Almost everyone seemed to share the same wild shock of red hair and freckled cheeks. If Ginny hadn't stayed by his side, he might have felt completely out of place. At the far end of the hall, Dumbledore had already claimed a modest round table. He waved cheerfully as Fred and George landed overhead, flying their trademark recliner-shaped contraption, the very one they'd tested on the Quidditch pitch, and hawked Mistopheles mist bottles and other whimsical gadgets to delighted relatives. Nearby, Hagrid lumbered toward a chair so enormous it dwarfed the rest. He carefully eased himself down beside Draco, Charlie, and Bill Weasley. The four of them leaned in close, deep in conversation. From the way they gestured and chuckled, it didn't look like they were talking about mundane things. Harry wondered what grand topic could command the attention of Gentle Giant, Slytherin champ, Ion, and two of the most adventurous Weasley brothers. Ginny slipped her hand into Harry's as she drew him toward the feast. "Come on," she whispered with a grin. "Let's find a spot before Fred and George sell out completely." With that, Harry let himself be led into the welcoming swirl of family and laughter, the clatter of dishes, and the warm, comforting haze of butterbeer, ready, at last, to join the celebration. Chapter 19, Ramses II. The sky had darkened to a rich indigo, and multicolored lights glimmered from the eyes of the fountain statues, guiding anyone still lingering on the estate's grounds. By now, most of the guests had departed. Only the Weasley family and Draco remained. 2 long tables, one for the adults, one for the children, were set up beside the softly lit fountain, and everyone settled in for a late dinner. Harry stretched his arms, grateful for the break. "Finally a proper meal," he said, lifting his goblet of pumpkin juice and taking a deep, relieved gulp. Ginny smiled at him from across the table and gave a nod of agreement. Draco, who'd already eaten a hefty lunch, raised his own glass of pumpkin juice in a mock toast. "I always knew the Weasleys were plenty, but I had no idea they were this many." There was one notable absence, Fred and George. Earlier, Mrs. Weasley had caught them hawking snacks and butterbeer to the younger guests, so the twins had bundled up their ill-gotten treats and slipped off to hide somewhere in the manor. Percy had promised to track them down, and then he, too, had vanished. No one quite knew if he'd gone after the twins or if something else had lured him away. For a moment, the only sounds were the gentle trickle of water and the soft chatter of the remaining guests. The flickering lights in the fountain cast dancing shadows over the Weasleys' animated faces, and the night felt warm and alive with family, friends, and the unspoken promise of mischief still to come. "Of course," Ron said with a grin, "wherever there are wizards, you'll find Weasleys." "But in Britain, we're the only ones with that name," Ginny added lightly, passing him another drumstick. Ron tucked in. Despite having eaten his fill earlier, he always seemed hungry when good food was around. Apart from Dad's 2 older brothers and their families, all our other branches live abroad. Harry, wiping pie crumbs from his chin, redirected the conversation. "Draco, you were chatting with Hagrid, Charlie, and Bill in the tent earlier. What were you all discussing after the wedding speech?" Draco leaned back, looking thoughtful. Well, I'm not surprised it drew Harry's attention. Charlie, Hagrid, and I were comparing notes on that Pluto dragon Harry summoned yesterday. Ron cocked his head. "And Bill, you two seemed to have a separate chat." Draco nodded. Bill was gently probing Harry for news, asking in circles, really. Then he regaled us with stories from his time in Egypt. He and some colleagues once unearthed a living mummy inside a pyramid. Unfortunately, They didn't have the chance to consult the local wizarding experts on ancient Egyptian magic before they had to move on. Ginny's eyes sparkled with curiosity. A living mummy? That's incredible, and a bit terrifying. Draco shrugged with a wry smile. Bill said it was both. One more reason to appreciate careful planning and a reliable translator for archaic spells. Maybe the mummy just dried out after leaving the pyramid, Draco said with a dismissive shrug. He'd never suspected Bill of opposing Harry and Ginny's engagement. If anything, Draco had toyed with the idea of meddling himself. In the end, though, Bill had wisely backed down when confronted with Mrs. Weasley's infamous temper. Dried out? Harry echoed, curiosity lighting his eyes. He didn't much care about whatever reservations Bill might have had. Literally, Draco continued. When they first cracked open the sarcophagus, the body inside was surprisingly well preserved, flesh still plump, auburn hair glossy as if it were still alive. But after death, it gradually lost all moisture and shriveled until there was nothing but a brittle husk. And then, Ron leaned forward, intrigued. Who was this mummy anyway? I was under the impression only the most powerful wizard kings, pharaohs, were ever mummified in ancient Egypt. Those sorcerer rulers claimed divine ancestry and held the Muggle population under their thrall. Draco nodded gravely. Exactly. That's why everyone here is so fascinated, and a little unnerved, by whoever lay in that tomb. Bill Weasley is working as a cursebreaker for Gringotts, assigned to their special division that uncovers magical artifacts and discreetly sells them to Muggle museums. Their latest discovery turned out to be the mummy of Ramses VI, Egypt's legendary third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, who was also, as it happens, a powerful wizard emperor. According to Gringotts experts, Ramses employed an extraordinarily complex life preservation enchantment, one that demanded absolute perfection in the construction of his pyramid. Any flaw would have doomed him. Ultimately, the spell backfired, and he died almost as soon as he was laid to rest. Here's the odd part. In all Muggle records, the excavation date has been deliberately set to June 1, 1886. On that day, a select group of celebrities hosted a lavish public relations gala to unwrap and display the mummy. It never happened then, but the date was faked to make it look as though Muggles had discovered Ramses over a century ago. Draco Malfoy let out a long sigh. A figure as momentous as a wizard emperor, entombed and magically preserved for thousands of years, reduced to a stunt in a Muggle PR showcase. Why change the date at all? He demanded. Ginny Weasley frowned. Exactly. Why not just say we found it now and let the Muggles believe they're witnessing a genuine first unwrapping? Draco leaned forward, his expression a mixture of admiration and disbelief. They must have planned from the start to keep him in Egypt. Ron raised an eyebrow. Because the Muggle world government there is too weak? Exactly. They invented an entire backstory that the mummy was unearthed in the 18th century, poorly preserved, then restored, and returned to Egypt. It was all smoke and mirrors. Draco's eyes sparkled, and it paid off twice over. Gringotts pocketed a fortune from the Muggle Museum and then made another killing with the Egyptian Ministry of Magic. Wait, 2 profits? Ron blinked. But the Ramses II exhibit at the museum was pure fiction. How did they even sell it? Draco waved a hand, as though brushing aside the awkward detail. They didn't actually sell the mummy itself. They sold the research, Ramses II's hair color, his exact height, the condition of his body just before death. That kind of data. No protection laws were broken because they weren't trading the artifact, only the information. Ron frowned. And the Ministry of Magic in Egypt, why pay for a supposedly fake mummy? To study the magic still woven into his pyramid, Draco explained. According to legend, Ramses VI bound his own spirit to the tomb. The ministry wanted to analyze that lingering enchantment. Ron shook his head, impressed against his will. I can't believe how smoothly Gringotts pulled that off. Draco grinned. When it comes to banking and a bit of creative archaeology, no one outduels Gringotts. So those Muggle museums thought they were buying actual mummies, Harry said, but in reality, they only paid for the research data they assumed they'd collected themselves. Ron's eyes went wide, his heart still racing. But why are you so interested in what I talked about with Bill? Draco leaned forward, curiosity written all over his face. Harry had noticed Draco's intense focus on this particular detail, right behind Ginny, who was listening just as intently. Earlier, Harry and Ginny had been dissecting Bill's strange behavior and his endless excuses for postponing their wedding. "I wanted to know why he kept picking your brain in such a roundabout way," Harry explained. Draco nodded thoughtfully. "Exactly. If he's a relative of the bride, there are certain lines he shouldn't cross." Harry's throat went dry. "What did he ask you about?" Draco hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Besides the routine family questions, he seemed unusually keen on details about you girls. Harry exchanged a puzzled look with Ginny, then turned back to Draco. "Details? What kind of details?" Draco's gaze flicked to Ron, who was just coming out of his daze. "Physical data," Draco said at last. "Physical data?" Harry repeated, eyebrows arching. Draco sighed. He wanted things like height, weight, hair color, all of that. Ron sat up straighter, rubbing his temples. "He actually asked for our physical stats?" Harry and Ginny shared a bemused smile. As absurd as it sounded, there was something undeniably Draco Malfoy about turning wedding small talk into a sit-down interview and worrying them all in the process. Draco shifted on his feet, avoiding eye contact. "Nothing important," he mumbled. "Just, were you two in the bathroom together?" Harry frowned. "Why would I?" Draco cleared his throat. "Also, I was wondering, do either of you have tattoos, and, how big they are?" Ginny's cheeks went pink. "Tattoos?" she echoed, glancing at Harry. "Why is he asking about that?" Harry asked, turning to Ginny. She bit her lip and stared at the floor. "Well, I may have mentioned to Bill that you've got a Norwegian Spinosaurus inked on your chest." Draco's eyes widened. "Seriously?" Ginny poked at the ground with one finger. "Yes, seriously. And then he had to know the size. Honestly, Bill can be way too." Harry laughed softly and slipped an arm around Ginny's shoulders. "You told him about my dinosaur?" She glanced up, a playful smile tugging at her lips. "I did, but I never said you'd drawn it to scale." Chapter 20, Dumbledore 6th. Harry sat up straighter, startled by a sudden thought. He really didn't know Bill Weasley at all. He'd pieced together bits and bobs, Charlie's stories about the Quidditch captain, Hagrid's tales of a dragon enthusiast, but beyond that, Bill remained an enigma. All Harry truly knew was that Bill had earned 12 OB-Wells, graduated top of his class, served as a Gryffindor prefect, became head boy, and boasted a reputation in the house even stronger than Percy's. In every other respect, he was a blank slate, and the more Harry wondered, the more self-conscious he felt. He pictured Bill's long copper hair, the silver hoop in his ear, his tall, lean build, and couldn't help a shiver. "Ginny," he blurted, voice a little wobbly, "did Bill ever have a girlfriend at Hogwarts?" Ginny's eyes went wide. Of all her brothers, Bill was the one known for his style. He'd always dressed with a laid-back flair, and students whispered that the best witches and wizards tended to pair off. She'd heard it all before. Bill was funny without being ridiculous, unpretentious despite his skill, and effortlessly good at nearly everything. If anyone could answer Harry's question, it was her. Bill Weasley had always carried the nickname Dumbledore II, ever since his Gryffindor days, though it had fallen out of use once he graduated and took the curse-breaking job at Gringotts. Still, the moniker never entirely vanished. Ginny's voice trembled as she spoke the words no one else dared. "You know, Bill was called Dumbledore Zig." Harry, Ron, and Draco all understood immediately. They'd been reminded by Rita Skeeter's sensational articles that Dumbledore had supposedly led his students into inappropriate entanglements. Could Bill, Gryffindor hero and all-around good guy, actually be smitten with Harry? "Do you think he's in love with Harry?" Ron's cheeks flushed pink at the mere suggestion. Draco shrugged, lips curling in a half-smile. "They say there's such a thing as love at first sight." Ginny nodded, fierce eyes blazing. Once Bill heard those rumors about Harry being under Dumbledore's spell, he started gathering everything he could find on Harry Potter. Interviews, news reports, you name it. All that admiration was kept bottled up, Ron added breathlessly, until he saw Harry again just a few days ago. "Exactly," Ginny leaned forward. "And now, it has to be true." Ron practically bounced in his seat. Then he bit his lip. "But should we tell him to back off?" Draco's expression grew serious. "Bill's a Gryffindor. He's not one to shrink from a challenge." He paused. "Unless someone else talks to him first." Ginny's fingers curled into fists. "Then I'll speak to Mum." "He's mine," she said in a low, fierce voice. and Harry definitely doesn't welcome that kind of attention. An hour later, Fred and George froze in place, utterly baffled. Their mother, who should have been furious, simply ignored them. It wasn't that she hadn't noticed. Her gaze had lingered on them for a moment, and Fred had even seen the corner of her mouth twitch. Yet she said nothing. With quiet determination, she glided up the stairs to the third floor and disappeared down the corridor. "She's acting really strange," George whispered. "Sad, more than anything," Fred agreed. "And she isn't going to find out we locked Percy in the fourth-floor bathroom." "That isn't even Mum's floor," George pointed out, eyebrows raised. "But Bill and Charlie's rooms are here," Fred reminded him. "Charlie's still out in the garden talking to Hagrid." George frowned. He'd be too distracted to notice anything anyway. Fred and George shared a quick look and, perfectly in sync, whispered, "Bill." They drew their wands. "Evanesco," quietly now. A cool tingle ran through them, and in an instant they had vanished without a trace. No sound accompanied their footsteps as they followed Mrs. Weasley up the corridor. Fred couldn't help the triumphant grin tugging at his lips, though of course no one could see it. Fred and George had poured every spare moment into mastering their new charms. They'd already perfected the disillusionment charm and the silencing charm, and now they were just one spell away from absolute invisibility. The rare bubble charm, which cloaked you in an invisible barrier that sealed off your body heat and scent. Once they'd mastered it, not even Argus Filch could catch them slipping through the castle walls. Tonight, Hogwarts would belong to them. From the shadow of the corridor, Fred slipped silently alongside the door to Bill's room. Mrs. Weasley's soft footsteps drifted inside. Fred raised a hand and tapped the air, the signal for George to stay perfectly still. Even in invisibility, they had taught themselves to sense one another, to move as one, like two halves of a single joke. Fred drew from his pocket a length of thin, flesh-toned cord, their latest bestseller back at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes, the retractable eavesdropper. With practiced ease, he slid one end beneath the crack at the bottom of the door and coiled the rest in his palm. They'd sold more of these little beauties than they'd ever dreamed, but tonight it was just for them. Fred grinned, though George couldn't see it. "I didn't tell you about this earlier, Bill," he murmured through the rope's hidden speaker. "I wanted to give you a bit of pride. You're not a kid anymore, are you?" The soft click of the door caught both twins off guard. From the other side came Mrs. Weasley's urgent whisper. "Bill?" Fred's fingers tightened on the cord. Everything was in place. All that remained was to listen, to learn, and to bring Hogwarts back under their control by morning. With the bubble charm still to perfect, the night and the castle were theirs for the taking. "I don't care if you prefer the same sex," Bill said softly, his voice warm and steady. "You're my son, no matter what." "But why Harry?" Fred pressed, his curiosity getting the better of him. He and George crept toward the door, eager to catch every word of the conversation inside. Before they could lean in, Bill muttered a nearly inaudible charm. Puff! Their extendable ears snapped back as if kicked by an invisible force. "Anti-intrusion ward," Fred spat, his annoyance evident as he dashed up the stairs. He'd already countered the disillusionment and silence jinxes protecting the door, but this new enchantment blocked even their magical eavesdropping. George stood beside him, frowning. "He's thorough," he muttered, waving his wand in a quick sequence of taps and twists. Within seconds, the ward dissolved. "No one's hearing a thing, not even our ears," George added in a low growl as he straightened, running a hand through his hair. The brothers exchanged a triumphant glance and prepared to listen once more. Bill folded his arms, his expression solemn. "Molly never makes false accusations," he said. "If she insists there's truth to it, we'd be fools to ignore her." "It's hard to believe," Fred muttered, rolling his eyes. "And have you forgotten Bill's old nickname? Dumbledore the Second. Poor Harry's about to be put through the ringer." George grinned, mischief sparkling in his eyes, and the brothers shared a conspiratorial look. Bill took a steadying breath. He decided to welcome Harry into the family fold, but deep down he still bristled. Ginny's giddy boasting about her new chest tattoo had struck him as oddly intimate, too intimate, perhaps, for mere puppy love. Then Draco Malfoy had dropped a surprising piece of intelligence. In passing, Bill learned more than he expected about Harry's dimensions. He winced at his own curiosity until he recalled the goblin culture he'd recently studied. Among goblins, stature equals status, so it's perfectly polite and practical to ask about size when gauging another's rank. What passed in their society as simple courtesy felt grossly out of place here in the wizarding world. Bill straightened his shoulders, determined to set aside that goblin lesson and judge Harry by one standard only: character. Even the most immaculately dressed goblin, voice sharp with authority, didn't necessarily outrank the shyest of his kin. Bill let out a soft sigh. "Well, Harry, I suppose that means the engagement ceremony is officially over." Just then, his mother slipped quietly through the open door. "Special thanks to my classmate Jishi Gun for the monthly ticket, and to everyone who's recommended and subscribed." Chapter 21. The Strange Fairy. Chapter 464. The Weird Goblin. Molly Weasley felt as though her head might explode. She had just heard the most incredible news from Ginny, and she still couldn't believe it. The moment Bill stepped through the front door, Molly followed him inside, barely noticing Fred and George, who were busy trading mischievous grins over some prank they'd pulled earlier. Her mind was consumed by one mission: confirm the rumor. Taking several deep breaths, she strode into the living room and froze. There stood Bill, her eldest, the son she'd always been proudest of, his cheeks flushed as he stared at Harry. His voice was unsteady as he whispered, "Harry." Molly swallowed her disbelief and pounced. "Bill, what in Merlin's name is going on here?" she demanded. "Ginny's told me everything. Don't even try to deny it." Bill ran a hand through his long hair and offered his mother a sheepish, wry smile. "Mom, really? Ask Draco about all the measuring he did," Molly interrupted, wagging a finger. "He can tell you exactly what I heard." Bill's grin faltered, but his eyes sparkled with amusement. "Mom, it isn't what you think." Molly folded her arms, cheeks still tinged pink. "You're almost 23, and you still haven't," she cleared her throat, "settled down with a nice girl, and you keep that ridiculous hairstyle. No wonder Harry and his friends keep teasing you." Bill shook his head, more embarrassed than angry. Molly realized that once this conversation had turned to her son's love life, her own cheeks warmed with embarrassment, and she let out a soft sigh. She might have been flustered, but she was determined. She was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter how awkward it got. Bill leaned back against the shade of a battered parasol, squinting into the Egyptian sun. He pressed the enchanted telephone to his ear and rolled his shoulders. "I'm in Egypt," he announced. On the other end of the line, his mother's familiar voice crackled through. "And how are you settling in, dear?" Bill let out an exasperated sigh. "There are goblins and mummies all over the place. My Gringotts colleagues here are all men. Goblins, yes, but still all male." He shook his head. "In Muggle terms, I might as well be on an engineering crew at a construction site. Finding a witch out here is like trying to dig a diamond from sand." Molly Weasley chuckled. "I thought you said you'd be back home this time." "Home," Bill groaned. "I'm not exactly a spring chicken. Besides, do me a favor, line up a girlfriend while you're at it." "Honestly," his mother said with a playful tsk, "your hair is a disgrace. If you let me, I'd have it trimmed in an instant." "Mom," Bill grumbled, running a hand through his wind-tangled hair. "I can't just produce a girlfriend on demand, and don't start calling me hirsute. Compared to Professor Dumbledore's flowing white mane, I'm practically bald." Molly laughed. "You and Dumbledore, you're both just a pair of old fossils, that's what you are." "Is it any wonder Harry and the others look at you sideways?" Bill shot back. Molly tutted. "And what about those earrings? One's a massive tusk. Really, Bill, what did the goblins at the bank make of those?" Bill stared down at the large ivory-colored earring dangling from his ear. "They said it's distinctive. Happy?" His mother's laughter rang out, warm and fond. "Come home soon, dear. We miss you." "I'll try," he promised. Then, watching a crew of goblins haul out an ancient sarcophagus in the blazing heat, he added quietly, "But don't hold your breath." Bill sighed in disgust. "Mother, the goblins at Gringotts couldn't care less what I wear, as long as I bring in plenty of treasure." Mrs. Weasley folded her arms. "Of course they don't, Bill. They're goblins, not fashion critics. Their sense of style is nothing like ours." "Exactly," Bill said patiently. "They even taught me how to take proper measurements, their own way of fitting armor and robes." Oh, splendid, Mrs. Weasley replied sarcastically. Next, you'll be measuring Goblin L, 80s for evening gowns. Bill held up his hands. All right, point taken. I won't go prancing around in Goblin couture. He paused, then added, once I'm back in England, I'll get in touch with my classmates. Mrs. Weasley's eyes narrowed. Your classmates? Female classmates? Bill shrugged. A few girls from school, yes, but Mum, please don't let Fred and George in on this. They'd turn it into a circus. His mother smiled knowingly. Now, why would I ever want to deprive those two mischief-makers of fresh material? Bill winced. Exactly, so it's best if they stay in the dark. Oh, and you should fill Harry and the others in yourself, rather than letting rumors fly. Harry and the others? Mrs. Weasley echoed, brow furrowing. And Fred and George? Bill hesitated. I'd rather they hear the whole story from you than get wind of it secondhand. Mrs. Weasley's face fell as she realized her mistake. She knew all too well how quickly her mischievous twins could turn any scrap of gossip into utter chaos. She'd already said too much, and Fred and George were the last people she wanted overhearing. She glanced toward the doorway, unease settling in her stomach. Mrs. Weasley's voice trembled with exasperation as she confronted her eldest son in the dim hallway outside Bill's bedroom. You didn't tell them, did you? Bill wiped cold sweat from his brow. No, I didn't, he insisted. All I did was meet with them. Mrs. Weasley's lips quirked at one corner. You ignored them? Bill ran a hand through his hair. Because you came to me first. He glanced anxiously at the enchanted door. Thankfully, I just put an anti-disturbance charm on it. Mrs. Weasley gave a slow nod, relief flooding her features. Good. She drew her wand and swept it across the door, breaking Bill's ward. Now go straighten this out with Ginny. Explain everything clearly, or neither of you will sleep tonight. With a final warning look, she pushed the door open and slipped inside. 10 minutes later, Mrs. Weasley emerged into the garden, where Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Draco had been pacing, worried that something terrible had happened to Bill. Their faces brightened at her appearance. Is he all right? Hermione asked. Mrs. Weasley smiled. He's fine. He simply spent too long with the goblins at Gringotts and said the wrong thing. Oof, Ron groaned, sinking onto a bench. I was beginning to think he'd been hexed. Harry leaned against the stone balustrade and took a careful sip of his butterbeer, something the adults, all except Sirius anyway, would never let him enjoy indoors. He made a small, appreciative noise. Goblins are such odd creatures, Draco raised an eyebrow. Actually, there are some important differences between goblins and us. Ron glanced at him. Well, you'd know, Malfoys have more dealings with goblins than the rest of us put together. Draco shrugged, expression thoughtful. They run the banks, they craft their own money, and they don't take kindly to wizards claiming ownership over something a goblin made. You've heard about their fine print, right? Even a casual remark can be twisted into a binding agreement. Hermione frowned. Is that why Bill got into trouble? Draco nodded. He used the phrase, your vault, which to a goblin means I own this. He didn't realize how deeply they guard their rights. Harry exchanged a glance with Ron. So it was just a misunderstanding? Exactly, Mrs. Weasley called from the doorway, and one that Bill will explain properly to Ginny and the goblins first thing tomorrow. That way everyone can sleep in peace. Relieved, the 4 students settled down under the moonlit sky, each mulling over Draco's warning. Goblins might be odd, but when it came to magic and money, he'd warned them, they were nothing to underestimate. Draco closed his book with a sudden snap and looked up at Harry, Hermione, and Ron. Our family ought to know something about the goblins who oversee the security of wizarding property, he began, sounding unusually stiff. He ran a hand through his hair. And I do know something. It might even explain what Bill's been talking about, but I can't quite piece together Bill's meaning. Hermione leaned forward, curiosity bright in her eyes. Ron exchanged a quick glance with her, then turned back to Draco. Do you think Bill just made it up? Draco shook his head. No, I'm certain it's true. Actually, it could explain why every bribe my family ever offered to goblins failed. He paused, as though weighing each word. Years ago, my grandfather, Abraxas Malfoy, claimed he'd enticed a goblin with the most tempting terms. The goblin accepted, they say, but after that, nothing. No follow-up payments, no accounts, no trace of him ever again. Harry frowned. So this goblin must have been low rank then? Exactly, Draco agreed. Grandfather assumed him important, purely by our wizarding standards. But if Bill's right, that goblin barely registered on Gringotts' radar. Ron exhaled. Okay, but what else makes this goblin so odd? Draco's expression darkened. That's the strangest part. Ginny's headdress today, made by a goblin who apparently slipped through every record-keeping system in Wizarding Britain. Hermione's breath caught. Harry and Ron exchanged stunned looks. The implications were clear. If a goblin of negligible status could vanish entirely and still be commissioned for high-profile work, the whole Malfoy family, and perhaps the wizarding world at large, had been underestimating an entirely new order of goblin authority. It actually comes from Sirius's family. His great-grandfather purchased it from the goblins. Harry nodded thoughtfully. Goblins don't share our ideas about ownership, payment, and compensation. To them, the true owner of any object is always its maker, not its buyer. In a goblin's eyes, anything crafted by a goblin remains the property of its creator. Draco leaned forward. So if a goblin were present at this wedding, he'd instantly recognize that this tiara is incredibly old. He could even pinpoint which goblin smith made it. And from that, Harry continued, he'd deduce that centuries ago a wizard bought it, but in goblin terms, only leased it. They believe that once the original purchaser dies, the piece must be returned to its creator. Letting it pass down through human generations is effectively stealing. Ron's eyes went wide. You're saying no matter how much you pay, goblins think you're just renting their work? And once you're gone, it has to go back? Draco frowned. Exactly. In goblin law, an object belongs to its maker forever. For us, passing down a family heirloom is tradition. To them, it's injustice. Now I get it. Goblins judge one another by how much gold they hoard, Harry said, shaking his head. He paused, the weight of the realization settling in. They're not just another magical people, he added with a weary sigh. They're an entirely separate race, independent of humans in every way. Chapter 22. Unspeakable Bill Weasley wished he could vanish, bury himself in the soft Egyptian sand rather than face the silent accusation in the room. It had all begun 10 minutes ago. As he descended the palace steps in a haze of exhaustion and regret, he'd slept almost nothing. Thoughts of the previous night's turmoil had driven him restless, so at dawn he'd slipped outside, hoping a quiet walk among the gilded fountains might soothe his raw nerves. He closed his eyes and let the cool mist cling to the sunburned skin that the desert wind had parched. A few heartbeats of peace, and then 3 soft cracks in the air like distant lightning. He stumbled forward, black spots clouding his vision. A moment later, the world went dark. Now he found himself seated on a hard bench in the long drawing room, framed by the polished oak walls of the palace. Across the broad table sat his father, Arthur Weasley, flanked by Charlie and Percy on one side and Sirius Black on the other. Dozens of photographs lay spread out before them, positioned so that when Bill's eyes fluttered open, they immediately met his gaze. He recognized the faces at once, wizards with jet-black hair and eyes the color of deep emerald. Instinctively, his chest tightened. Hadn't seen most of them before, but something in their uniform appearance set his nerves on edge. Bill, his father began, voice calm but heavy. Molly tried calling you last night. Bill's heart lurched. He pushed himself up, knees cracking, and stood, towering uneasily over the table. His throat felt coated in dust. Why am I here? He managed, voice raw. Arthur exchanged a quick look with Charlie, then fixed Bill with a steady gaze. Look at these pictures, he said. We need to know how much you know about the man in the last photo. Bill swallowed. He forced his eyes back to the images before him, his heart hammering as each familiar or nearly familiar face swam into focus. Something unspeakable lay hidden in those photographs, and he suddenly feared the gulf between what he'd seen and what everyone else already knew. The room fell silent once more, the only sound the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. Bill braced himself. Whatever questions lay ahead, he knew there was no turning back. I never planned on doing this, Bill admitted, voice tight. Arthur Weasley met his son's gaze over the breakfast dishes. Sirius insists that unless you find a boyfriend today, you'll become a genuine threat to Harry, he sighed. And frankly, I agree. It's necessary. Mrs. Weasley sat beside him, silent and concerned. Charlie's shoulders slumped, and Percy hovered at the edge of his seat. Arthur slid a stack of glossy photographs across the table. "Look at these," he said. "All of these wizards are gay, and each of them bears a striking resemblance to Harry." From the hearth, Sirius Black's icy voice chimed in. "Midnight black hair. A handful even have green eyes, just like his." He flipped through the prints with clinical precision, his expression a strange cocktail of disgust, irritation, and detachment. Bill stared at the pictures, frustration coiling in his chest. He rolled his only working eye at Sirius. "Why are you?" Charlie began, but his voice cracked. Percy cleared his throat. "Father, are you sure about this? Maybe Bill." Bill's vision blurred with unshed tears. How had his own family come to doubt him so completely? And where had his mother been all this time? Why hadn't she warned Dad about this ridiculous plan? He pressed a hand to his temple, swallowed hard, and braced himself as Sirius reached for another photograph to add to the growing pile. Elsewhere in the Weasley garden, Bill hovered just out of sight as his father and Percy confronted him. "Percy, we've got solid evidence," Mr. Weasley said, his voice unsteady with disappointment. Percy chimed in, gently but firmly. "Bill, you know Ron invented the mist bottle to record his thoughts and feelings, right? Ever since, Fred and George have been trying to duplicate it, but they never quite managed to reproduce Ron's original design." Mr. Weasley folded his arms. "They failed at that, but they did discover a way to add their own content into the mist." Percy gave a slow nod. Except for Professors Dumbledore, McGonagall, Moody, and Kingsley, who were away at the time, Charlie, Sirius, Hagrid, Dad, and I all heard your private conversations with Mum. Fred and George tweaked the mist bottle so they could store and replay everything you said. Bill's heart pounded. "You mean, you heard me talking to Mum?" Percy's eyes were sorrowful. "Yes, I'm sorry, Bill. Even Dad and I listened in. How could you let this happen?" A sharp pang of hurt shot through Bill. His last ally had turned on him, and in that moment he felt utterly alone. Before Bill could even turn his frustration into a scathing remark at Fred and George, Sirius's voice cut through the room. "Oh, you like him?" Sirius teased, leaning forward with a mischievous grin. Fred snorted. "What a coincidence. He lives in Devon, too." George picked up the thread. "You two could meet up all the time." "And he's in Tonks's year at Hogwarts," Sirius added, waving the photograph as though it were a family heirloom. Percy, ever precise, announced as though stating the time of day, "He's also top of the Quidditch team." Bill felt his head swim. His father and brothers riffed off each other. One moment they were admiring the fellow's black hair and green eyes. The next they were debating what hour he typically rose, what brand of toothpaste he preferred, even whether he'd been spotted with sugar in his tea. Each new tidbit felt like another blow to Bill's sanity. Finally, Percy's voice, measured, reasonable, floated over the din. "Why don't we let Bill go down to Devon? He could meet this, debater in person, give him a few Weasley pointers." Bill nearly leapt from his chair. If Percy was going to untie him on the promise of a family-sanctioned introduction, then by Merlin's beard, Percy would forever be his favorite brother. As for Charlie, well, Bill decided not even to think about that right now. Bill froze as his father's eyes bulged. With a snap of his wrist, Mr. Weasley drew his wand and sent a streak of blue light across the room. Bill staggered back, sucking in air. "Bill," his father, Sirius, demanded, voice tight, "what do you make of this young man, Gestu?" Bill straightened, swallowing his surprise. "If you ask me, he seems all right." Sirius's relief was almost visible. "Good. I'll arrange for you to meet him this afternoon." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "Mind if I see that mist bottle Fred and George gave you?" Suppressing his frustration, Bill exhaled and reached into his robes. From within he produced a delicate glass vial. Inside, a ghostly mist curled and shimmered like captured moonlight. He handed it to Sirius, who frowned thoughtfully as he removed the cork. "Here," Bill said, stepping forward. Sirius tipped the bottle, letting a wisp of mist escape. Bill closed his eyes and inhaled. The moment the scent touched his lungs, the world around him melted away. He was standing in a shadowed corridor outside his mother's study. He followed her tall, confident stride, every footstep resounding in his mind, though none of it echoed in the stone hall. As she slipped behind the heavy oak door, he crept to the frame and pressed a thin black hose through a narrow crack. Voices drifted out, soft, intimate. He froze, heart pounding in his chest. Every instinct told him to retreat, but a deeper, fiercer urge held him in place. He whispered the words of the anti-disturbance charm. Instantly, wards sparked and fractured. Then reality flickered, and Bill found himself jolted back into the bright kitchen at number 12, the familiar chatter of the Weasley clan rising around him. He opened his eyes, meeting his father's and Sirius's expectant gazes. Bill uncorked the vial, setting it upright on the table. He leaned forward, forcing a calm smile. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's see what happens next." Bill shook his head, as if rousing himself from a dream. "The image behind me," he said at last, "was Ron eating. I didn't even realize it until just now." Sirius raised an eyebrow. "And you stayed silent the entire time?" "I didn't see any point in mentioning it." Bill's gaze grew sharp. "Besides, don't tell me you don't like Harry." Sirius crossed his arms. "If you truly weren't interested, why did you spend the conversation humming along, nodding every few seconds, and then cast an anti-interference charm so nobody could eavesdrop? That makes zero sense." "If you had no interest at all, why go to all that trouble?" Sirius pressed, leaning forward. After all, Harry was the spitting image of James. Of course Bill would be curious. Even Sirius himself had to stifle a chuckle. Bill let out a reluctant sigh. "All right, I admit it, I was surprised, but then I spoke with Mrs. Weasley afterwards." Sirius's lips curved into a grin. "Let me guess," he said, tapping his chin. "You managed to steer the conversation toward Harry's size?" Bill rolled his eyes. Molly's questions were unrelenting. Chapter 466, half a month later. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since Harry helped sort out Bill's problem, and thankfully, Harry hadn't seen a single letter arrive for Bill from anywhere in Europe. He could tell those envelopes at a glance, sprinkled with tiny heart seals, tied up with pastel ribbons, and stamped with delicate kiss marks. Ron burst into the kitchen, carrying a pot of steaming hot milk, and set it down at the corner of the dining table. He leaned in close and lowered his voice. "Do you honestly think Bill's situation is over?" he asked Harry, who was still frowning. "I haven't seen a single letter in ages," Harry replied with a shrug. His gaze drifted past Ron and settled on the old grandfather clock standing in the corner. Harry had always liked that clock, even though it was useless for telling the time. Instead of numbers, its dial was marked with locations: home, school, work, on the road, missing, hospital, prison, 9 places in all, each pointed to by a golden hand engraved with a Weasley name. He watched as every hand currently rested on home. Harry allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Looks like everyone's where they're supposed to be," he said softly. Ron nodded, pouring milk into 2 mugs. For the first time in weeks, peace had truly returned to the burrow. At 12 o'clock, the Weasley clock chimed, or at least it should have. Instead of marking the hour, its central dial glowed ominously. Life in danger. All 7 of the family's slender hands swung toward home, but Mr. Weasley's, easily the longest of the 9 needles, remained stubbornly fixed on work, and Ginny's, by far the shortest, still trembled at on the road. "Hey, Rory, I made it!" Ron spun around in the hallway as Harry dropped his trunk on the floor. "You didn't come here just for Ginny." Harry raised an eyebrow. "I came for you too, of course." "I thought you were here for me." Ron folded his arms, stepping between Harry and his sister with mock indignation. "Who do you think you're talking to?" Harry rolled his eyes and spread his hands. "Ginny's my fiancée, remember?" Ron's face split into a grin. "Right, of course it is. All for my sister." He plucked a sandwich from a nearby plate and took a bite, unconcerned. "Better watch what you say around Fred and George, though." "Why?" Harry glanced up at the clock again. "I'm not Bill. He's head of the student union, has that swanky job at the ministry, and always looks cool in his jackets." Ron chewed thoughtfully. "Plus, last time Fred and George tried matchmaking, they wound up in trouble for 10 days straight. They only got out of detention yesterday. Do you really want to push your luck?" Harry sighed. "Fair point. But speaking of rumors, didn't Rita Skeeter claim that you, Neville, and I were in some sort of triad during our first year?" Ron swallowed. "Skeeter. Lovely woman." He shrugged and snorted. "If she says it, half the castle will believe it by morning. But don't worry. Your secret's safe. For now." He took another bite of his sandwich as Harry shook his head, wondering how exactly life at the Burrow would ever be dull. Harry bristled. Look, this has nothing to do with Fred and George. Ron took a thoughtful sip of milk. Sure it doesn't. That's just the aftermath of Sirius using the Daily Prophet's resources to find Bill, well, never mind. What I'm getting at is, where do you get off trying to compete with Ginny? Harry ran a hand through his hair. So if I have to choose between going to Lavender's family home or my house, Ron cut in, slamming his fist on the table. Obviously, you stay with us. A moment later, Ginny's voice rang from the doorway. Oi, keep your hands off my fiancé, you hypocrite. At the same instant, the little hand on the grandfather clock swung to the home position. Ginny stormed into the room. Back at Hogwarts, you never passed up a chance to sneak off with Lavender, and now you're lecturing me? Before Ron or Harry could react, she hopped onto Harry's lap, blocking Ron entirely. Arms folded, she glared at him. I do, didn't buy it. Are you even the Bill Fred and George keep raving about, or just some imposter? I'm not stupid. From the back of the room, Bill cleared his throat. He stepped forward, smoothing the front of his robes. Honestly, Ginny, I'm not playing games. I'm just Lavender's boyfriend. Harry blinked. Wait, so you're not engaged to her? Bill shook his head with a small, rueful smile. Lavender's parents are still a bit wary of me. It's exactly like it was with Professor Trelawney and Parvati back at school. Ron leaned in, voice low. Maybe even more so now that you're Bill. Ginny scowled. Harry shifted awkwardly on his feet, and Bill simply waited, caught between well-meaning friends and a skeptical family. Going to Sirius's house is completely different, Ron said, leaning forward as if sharing the world's best secret. Remus and Tonks are still living there, and I heard Regulus has finally learned to talk. We can tease that mad old portrait in the hallway. It's absolutely priceless, and the troll's foot umbrella has been magically restored to perfect condition. Plus, we even get an early peek at the next day's Daily Prophet. Harry's eyes lit up. That sounds fantastic. Why don't we go again over summer break? Ron's face fell. Forget it, Harry frowned. What? Why not? Because Draco won't be around, he's off with Pansy, so it'll just be you two. How much fun is that? Ginny pounded the table. Did you forget I'm here? Ron shrugged reluctantly. Right, you. But Mum and Dad would never let you go. They support your engagement with Harry, but they won't approve of you gallivanting off to Sirius's place without any real supervision. Sirius hardly ever behaves like an adult, and the only responsible one, Remus, is always off with Tonks. Ginny scowled. Ron sighed, clearly defeated by his own logic. The burrow looked more spacious than ever. The once cramped corridors had been widened, the garden gates repainted, and 4 brand-new bedrooms added down the east wing. Hermione strolled in, beaming at the improvements. It's wonderful here now. Bright, airy, almost like a different house. Ron nodded, stretching his arms. That's because we finally renovated. Ever since Charlie and Bill moved back in with all their gear, we had to expand. Suddenly, there are 4 extra rooms. Ginny dropped into a kitchen chair, her expression souring. Which means Fred and George each have their own bedroom. Ron raised an eyebrow. What's wrong with that? They've never been apart, eating together, sleeping together, even sharing a bathroom. Ginny crossed her arms. Exactly my point. Why give them separate rooms if they'll just sit together and do the same things? Actually, Ron said with a reluctant grin, George insists the extra space is perfect for their experiments. Ginny snorted. Their experiments nearly wrecked my entire smoke bomb collection last week, and now they've gone and invented a charm that hides messages in the smoke clouds. At this, Ron frowned. Do you really think Fred and George could ever split up, each running his own business? Ginny leaned back, a teasing glint in her eye. I knew that's the real question on your mind. No way, Ron snapped, throwing his hands up. We've got the Triwizard Tournament next semester, he continued, voice rising. Every student will take part, and the Ministry has even granted us permission to use magic at home. This isn't just about Hogwarts, it's about Britain's reputation. He jabbed a finger at Fred and George, who were lounging against a counter. Yet here you are, wasting all your time on pranks instead of practicing your spells. Growing more serious by the second, Ron clambered onto a bench, ready to address the entire room as though it were a podium. We! Engorgio! The twins' wands flashed in unison. Ron's protest died in his throat as he clasped at his neck. His eyes bulged, each finger swelled to the size of sausages, and his robes tore at the seams. Within seconds, he resembled a grotesquely oversized balloon, pressed helplessly against the hewn stone wall. "Well," Fred said with a smirk, stepping out from behind the blimp-like figure, "you do look pretty pumped about it." "Don't worry, mate," George added, puffing out his chest theatrically. "We'll make sure you get plenty of practice." The twins struck triumphant poses, wands aloft, while Ron, now a floating spectacle of limbs and fabric, bobbed awkwardly on the bench.